Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the earlier shadows of Rome, long before marble forums and swaggering senators, when the place was little more than a cluster of huts clinging to a few hills. You can almost smell the damp reed thatch in the evening air as you stand there, watching smoke rise in shy spirals. And even though you're just arriving, you can already tell you probably won't survive this era. Nobody does. Life expectancy here is like playing a game where the rules are written on soggy bark and the bark is already on fire. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, letting the warm dusk wrap around you. Its earthy smell carrying hints of wood smoke, wet clay, and the mild panic of a society that hasn't entirely agreed not to eat each other yet. Rome, if we can even call it that in this earliest age, is a messy patchwork of shepherd families, refugees from nearby tribes, and runaway labourers looking for a fresh start or just trying to avoid being dragged back. And within this shaky little community, women aren't merely standing in the background, they're anchoring the entire operation, often without anyone noticing. You step into one of the early huts, its doorway a simple cloth flap that droops like a sleepy eyelid. Inside, you feel heat radiating from a central fire, the orange glow flickering over pots, hides, baskets, and a few half-finished tools. A woman sits near the flames, weaving a basket with hands so practiced they barely seem to belong to her body. She doesn't bother looking up at you, because in this world you're about as noticeable as a pebble caught in a sandal. But as you watch her work, you begin to see the quiet truth. This early settlement, the seed of what would become one of the most influential civilizations in history, simply cannot function without women who stabilize food, home, ritual, and social bonds. Men might be out pasturing livestock or deciding which neighbor to distrust that week, but women are the ones who make sure the community wakes up tomorrow. One mainstream historical fact you probably know, or you've nodded through in a documentary once, is that early Rome wasn't yet the structured republic people imagine. It was a stew of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan influences, and many of those cultures relied heavily on women to maintain household continuity. Without their labour, food storage, and ritual observance, the whole settlement would crumble faster than a poorly baked Roman flatbread. And trust me, early flatbread was basically edible sandstone. But here's the quirky tidbit. Women in these early communities often used coded methods to communicate across huts, little knots, symbols in cloth, even the placement of certain household items, to signal news, warnings, or the availability of goods. Think of it like prehistoric neighbourhood group chat, except everyone's Wi-Fi is just intuition and gossip. You shift your weight and accidentally knock over a small bone pendant hanging by the doorway. It clinks against the wall, and the woman finally glances up at you with the expression of someone who has tolerated enough nonsense for one day. You can tell she's used to managing chaos. Children, livestock, men returning home with confusing stories, and she does it all while maintaining a quiet influence that rarely gets recorded in any heroic tales. But she's shaping the social fabric in ways the men outside, arguing about territory lines, don't fully grasp. Historians still argue whether early Roman women held more de facto power than later classical-era women, or if our glimpses of agency are simply scattered artifacts interpreted through modern wishful thinking. But as you stand here, watching her weave the pattern that will become a useful basket for storing precious barley, you feel how crucial she is to survival. She's not a political figure, not yet, but she's the backbone of every decision that counts. You step back outside, feeling the night cool against your skin. Children dart between huts, chasing each other with sticks that are doing their best impression of swords. A pair of men loudly debate whether a boundary stone was moved by spirits, neighbours, or definitely not me, which is exactly what someone guilty would say. Off to the side, a group of women gather around a communal grinding stone, their conversation low, steady, rhythmic. You can't understand their words, but the tone carries reassurance. Families are fed, feuds are managed, and seasonal changes are prepared for long before the men have even agreed what month it is. As you listen, you notice something delightful. These women are multitasking with the supernatural confidence of someone handling 3 tasks, a toddler and a stray goat at once. One cracks a joke that makes the younger one snort. Comedy isn't new, It's just been using poor husbands as punchlines for 3,000 years. This early Rome depends on labour that doesn't get written into legends because it doesn't create shiny moments of triumph. It creates continuity. And continuity is extremely boring until it isn't, like when the grain runs out, or a neighbouring group considers a raid, or a child spikes a fever. In those moments, the community looks not to the loudest men, but to the women who already know what needs to be done. You trail along the slope of the hill, passing small shrines of bone and clay. Women tend these shrines more often than men, leaving offerings with a kind of practiced grace, a smear of fat, a piece of bread, a twist of herbs. Ritual in early Rome is less about grandeur and more about making. Sure, nothing catastrophic happens before breakfast. You can tell by the way they move that these rites are both spiritual and practical, meant to keep order in a world that has a habit of wandering off the rails. One woman sets out a small clay figure at the shrine's base, muttering something under her breath. You catch only fragments, but the intention is clear. Protect the children, protect the hearth, protect the community from whatever nonsense the men have gotten themselves into this time. And in that quiet prayer, you hear the real heartbeat of early Rome. As the firelight fades and the stars settle overhead, you feel yourself drifting with the rhythm of the early settlement. The slow hum of industry, the soft crackle of flames, the whispers of women shaping a society without fanfare, without statues, without epics sung in their name. Their power is subtle, steady, almost invisible, yet absolutely foundational. You breathe in the night air and let the story carry you forward, deeper into Rome's beginnings, where women hold the threads of the future, weaving them carefully under the noses of leaders who don't yet realize how much depends on them. You ease onward through the twilight of early Rome, letting the murmurs of the settlement thin into a gentler hush. The moment you pass the last cluster of huts, you feel the landscape stretch open around you, the hills rolling like half-buried giants, the air carrying the smoky sweetness of evening fires. And as you walk, you drift toward the stories that shaped this place long before anyone bothered to write anything down, or even spell Rome the same way twice. These founding myths, they're loud, dramatic, full of bravado, but beneath their swaggering surfaces lie quieter voices, especially the voices of women who kept the stories alive and meaningful. You can practically hear them as you wander. The retellings, the warnings, the jokes slip between lines like secret spices. Rome loves its legends, but you're about to see how much those legends leave out. You pause near a familiar ridge, where a few figures are gathered around a flickering torch. They're retelling the story of Romulus and Remus, again. Honestly, at this point, the people here treat these myths like Netflix reruns. Same plot, same characters, everyone arguing about which parts were definitely true. One mainstream historical fact is that early Romans relied heavily on oral tradition. Nothing is written yet and everything is flexible. Myths mutate each time they're told, swelling or shrinking based on who's speaking and which neighbour they feel like insulting today. But here's the thing nobody mentions outright. Women are often the ones smoothing the stories, adding the connective tissue, making sure the moral lands. They might not be credited, but they're the storytellers when kids gather at night, the keepers of memory when elders pass away, and the ones who subtly tweak tales to influence what behaviours become acceptable. You shift closer and someone is describing the wolf who nursed the twins. The crowd leans in, eager for the dramatic beats. But you notice an older woman at the back humming along to the rhythm of the tale with a knowing smirk. She's heard this story enough times to poke holes in it with a wooden spoon, and here comes the quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe early Roman women inserted certain wolf details, because the word lupa also meant a woman of questionable reputation, making the myth both noble and a little cheeky. Ancient people loved layered jokes as much as anyone. They just carved them into mythology instead of posting them online. The storyteller continues, and you feel the dramatic energy swell, as if Rome itself is rehearsing its identity. But you also sense the subtle edits drifting through the crowd. When the speaker emphasizes Romulus' strength, a few women exchange glances as if to say, "Sure, brave boy, but who fed him? Who kept him alive?" The myths highlight male heroism, but lived experience highlights everyone else. Historians still argue whether the Sabine women, another famous mythic group, were portrayed as peacemakers because the real women of early Rome exerted similar diplomatic influence, or whether later storytellers retrofitted the narrative to justify cultural assimilation. Either way, the story is always told with men at the centre, and women holding the emotional steering wheel just out of frame. You wander a little farther and find yourself near a quiet corner of the settlement, where two young girls are practicing the beginnings of an epic chant. They stumble over the lines, laughing when they lose their place. These songs aren't written anywhere, so they're stitched into memory the way you'd memorize lyrics of a favourite lullaby. This is how culture survives, through repetition, gentle correction, and the occasional sibling elbow. You kneel to listen. One girl pauses, lowers her voice dramatically, and whispers a line about the early Roman kings. When she finishes, she says to the other, "No, no, your mother says the queen was the smart one." And there it is, the kind of subtle myth editing that has been happening for centuries. Women don't rewrite history with ink. They rewrite it through bedtime retellings, nudging the legends one generation at a time. As you rise again, a soft breeze lifts the edge of your tunic. You walk past a tall standing stone etched with early symbols. Some of the marks are animal shapes, some look like tally strokes, and some, if you squint, are clearly someone's attempt to draw the neighbour's goat as revenge for chewing their sandals. But the stone also tells you something else. Early Romans didn't divide myth from reality. Everything overlapped. Daily life, superstition, politics, weather, they all mixed together like a pot of stew someone forgot to stir. Myths gave structure, and women gave those. Myths' longevity. Without them, half these stories would have evaporated the moment the campfire sputtered out. Beyond the ridge, you hear the familiar crackle of a hearth, and you see a woman sitting alone, threading beads onto a thin leather cord. Each bead represents a story, a memory, a warning, or a moment worth passing on. You watch her fingers move calmly, precisely. She's not a queen, not a priestess, not anyone a chronicler will ever name, yet she's a guardian of stories more important than the men who run around claiming destiny as their job. Rome, in its earliest form, is a world built from these layered tales, powerful, silly, confusing, inspiring. And you walk through them as though drifting through fog, hearing whispers from every direction. Women thread the stories together while men claim the spotlight, and somehow that balance becomes the foundation of a civilization. You keep walking, letting the myths swirl around you, half truth, half performance, half someone's grandmother's dramatic exaggeration. That's three halves, yes. Mythology has never been good at math. As the fires fade behind you, you feel the stories lingering in the air like warm breath, guiding you deeper into the heart of early Rome, where the quiet power of women continues to shape everything you're about to discover. You move deeper into the settlement, letting the soft glow of early Roman fires guide your steps. The huts here cluster more tightly, the walls leaning together like neighbours whispering secrets. You duck beneath a low lintel. Apparently door heights back then were designed to humble even the average height time traveller, and step into the heart of the Roman household, the domus in its earliest, simplest form. And this is where women do some of their quietest, yet most influential work. The moment you enter, the air changes. Outside, it's all noise. Men arguing about livestock, kids rehearsing myths with questionable accuracy, someone insisting their goat is basically a war hero. But inside the home, the soundscape softens. You hear the crackle of embers, the gentle scrape of pottery, the hush-hush of whispered decisions being made that will ripple outward into the community. You stand in the centre of the room, noticing how the hearth anchors everything. A woman crouches nearby, turning a flat piece of bread with a practiced, almost bored flick of her wrist. She doesn't even glance at it. She just knows. This is her domain, a place where nothing seems dramatic but everything is essential. Household power structures in early Rome look mild from the outside, but don't let the quiet fool you. This is where the real steering happens. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Early Roman households were deeply patriarchal in law, yes, but the paterfamilias, the male head, wasn't always around. He might be pasturing livestock miles away, settling disputes, or just taking an unnecessarily long walk because someone else moved his favourite chair. Women, meanwhile, managed nearly every aspect of daily life: food, storage, finances, family discipline, small-scale farm work. They were the practical CEOs of the home, and the home was the engine of survival. The woman at the hearth clears ash away with a smooth circular motion. She's thinking, maybe about her children, maybe about that neighbour who keeps borrowing tools and returning them with one suspicious new dent. But you can tell that the decision she makes today, how to allocate grain, who should help with what task, which feud needs gentle calming, will shape the household far more than any official proclamation. You wander toward a low table, where a teenage girl is stitching leather. Her fingers move quickly, tugging the thread tight with a snap. She glances at you with the bored confidence of someone who already knows she'll run her own household someday. There's a self-assurance there that early myths rarely describe, but it existed all the same. Girls weren't raised to be quiet, they were raised to be indispensable. And here comes the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found small clay tokens in early Roman homes that seem to be tally markers, used by women to track debts, obligations, and trades. Basically, ancient domestic spreadsheets. It turns out women have been running household accounting systems long before anyone invented the phrase personal finance guru. You keep moving, ducking your head, again, as you pass into a smaller section of the house. Here, herbs hang from the rafters, bundles of rosemary, sage, and a few plants you're pretty sure are either medicinal or possibly just weeds someone felt emotionally attached to. A matron sits cross-legged sorting them, humming softly. She pauses, looks up, and narrows her eyes as if deciding whether you're useful. Spoiler, you're probably not. Historians still argue whether women's behind-the-scenes authority in early Rome came from necessity, or from long-standing cultural traditions inherited from neighbouring peoples. Some say early Latin tribes gave women more freedom, others argue the opposite. But standing here, listening to the matron assign tasks to two younger women like a general preparing for logistical war, you sense the debate misses the point. No matter the law, real life is happening right here, and the control does not belong to the loudest person. You take one small step back, and immediately bump into a shelf stacked with jars. A clay lid rattles, threatening to topple. Instantly, all three women look at you with the combined power of every Roman matron who's ever existed. You freeze, apologizing with the silent cringe of someone who knows they've almost ruined hours of work. The girl stitching leather hides a smirk. The matron mutters something that probably translates to men, even though you aren't one in this scenario. You're just contributing to the statistical average of household chaos. Gathering your courage, you edge toward the doorway to observe the final detail of early household power: conversation. Decisions aren't shouted, they're shaped through whispers, shared glances, subtle adjustments. When a dispute arises, women use tone, gesture, and social influence to guide outcomes, nudging family members toward choices that maintain harmony, or at least avoid disasters like burning the bread or accidentally offending the neighbour with the angry rooster. Outside, you hear a man calling for someone to help move a bundle of firewood. The women exchange looks saying, "We'll get to it when we get to it." And honestly, the settlement probably depends more on their timing than his enthusiasm. You step out of the home, blinking as the brightness of the early afternoon hits your eyes. Behind you, the women continue their rhythms, quiet but firm, soft-spoken but decisive. Power here isn't loud. It's woven into the daily motions, the decisions no one sees, the hearth that holds the world together, one chore, one conversation, one perfectly flipped flatbread at a time. You take a slow breath and let the warmth from the hearth linger on your skin as you drift forward toward the next threads in Rome's unfolding history. A story shaped, strengthened, and sustained by hands few ever credited but everyone relied upon. You follow a narrow footpath that winds between low stone walls and uneven patches of earth, the kind that practically scream, "Someone tripped here last week." The sun has slipped into a softer angle now, coating the settlement in warm gold. It's the exact kind of lighting modern photographers would kill for, and yet early Romans just use it to argue about goats. Go figure. As you walk, you notice a small procession moving toward a larger house. A woman draped in a simple wool cloak, her hair braided neatly behind her head. Two older women flank her, murmuring guidance. A group of children trail behind them with the solemnity of kids forced to attend a ceremony they don't understand but have been bribed to behave through. You drift closer, drawn by the slow gravity of marriage in early Rome. Not the romantic ceremony you might expect. No flower arches, no dramatic vows, no tipsy uncle giving a toast that feels like an emotional hostage situation. Here, marriage is strategy. Pure, practical, deeply entrenched in survival and social alignment, and women move through this system with an influence that's quiet, but undeniably sharp. You step inside the domus where preparations are underway. The interior hums with purposeful energy. A pot simmers at the hearth, releasing a smell that's halfway between comfort and, are those herbs supposed to be that colour? A cluster of women adjust linens, rearrange pottery, and reposition a stool no fewer than 4 times because someone decided it's bad luck if the bride bumps her toe on it. Ancient superstition. 1. Modern ergonomics. 0. Here's one mainstream historical fact. Early Roman marriage often operated under manus, a system where a woman legally transferred from her father's authority to her husband's. On paper, this seems restrictive, but in practice, women found channels of influence long before legal reforms gave them more freedom. The domus was a political microcosm, and a smart woman learned to navigate it with the kind of finesse that later senators could only dream of. You watch the bride-to-be sitting calmly as the older women braid a thin red ribbon into her hair. The ribbon is symbolic: protection, continuity, fertility. But it also marks a transition. She is moving from one household to another, carrying her family's reputation, alliances, and guidance with her. She might not be marching into battle, but make no mistake, she's stepping into a negotiations arena. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some early Roman communities exchanged small cakes or pieces of bread during betrothal ceremonies. Bread wasn't just food, it symbolized shared future wealth. And yes, this means you can technically say ancient Romans proposed with carbs. Some traditions are eternal. Once the preparations settle, the bride's mother kneels beside her. Their conversation is soft, like water nudging river stones. You lean in, careful not to inhale too loudly like a creepy, time-travelling vacuum cleaner. The mother doesn't offer grand speeches. She just reminds her daughter of the small things. Manage the pantry wisely. Trust your instincts. Never let your husband think he invented your ideas. The daughter smiles. The kind of smile that says she has heard this wisdom many times and has already chosen which version of it she'll upgrade. Historians still argue whether these women-to-women transfers of practical knowledge shaped Roman society more than male political institutions. Some claim it's romanticized, others argue it's foundational. Standing here, you sense the truth. The emotional architecture of Rome was built in these quiet moments, not Senate sessions. The bride lifts a small wooden figurine, a household deity passed from her mother. The gesture is intimate, grounding. Deities like this, Laras and Penates, aren't grand gods of war. They're guardians of hearth and home, symbolizing continuity. And though men may have held legal authority over these spirits, women handled the day-to-day rituals. They were, in their own subtle way, the spiritual administrators of the household. You step aside as the family forms a circle around the bride. She rises, cheeks flushed with anticipation, or maybe the warmth of the hearth. Her younger sister squeals softly, receiving one of the leftover ribbons, an unofficial promise of future matchmaking attempts. She looks both delighted and slightly horrified, which feels appropriate. Outside the house, the groom stands with 2 men who are either brothers or friends, or possibly just random dudes who wandered in for free food. Early Rome is unclear about such distinctions. He shifts nervously, fumbling with the edge of his cloak. He's trying very hard to appear composed, but he has the energy of someone who rehearsed his lines and instantly forgot all of them. The bride emerges. There's a brief moment where their eyes meet. Not romantic necessarily, but significant. They're about to become the center of a new household economy. You can practically hear fate cracking its knuckles. The ceremony is simple. A few exchanges, a shared symbolic touch, maybe a blessing whispered by an elder. But beneath that simplicity lies an entire world of alliances. Families securing trade agreements, neighbors strengthening ties against rival groups, households pooling labor and resources. Marriage is the glue, the binding thread in early Roman society, and women, through emotional intelligence and social awareness, are often the ones who keep that glue from peeling. As the final gestures complete, you notice the bride's mother subtly adjusting her daughter's cloak, signaling approval. Another woman sets aside a bowl of grain that will mark the household's blessing. Children dart forward, already chasing each other again because attention spans existed the same way in 700 BCE as they do today. You walk with the newly joined couple toward the threshold of their future, home. As they step inside, You sense the shift. A new household begins, shaped by quiet conversations, shared work, and the unspoken influence the bride will carry with her. Marriage may be presented as a social contract between families, but women are the ones who turn that contract into a functioning reality. You watch the hearth glow warmer as the couple takes their places inside. The bride glances back once at her mother, then turns to her new life, calm, capable, aware that her role extends far beyond ceremony. And you follow the faint trail of her footsteps back into the bustling heart of early Rome, where the quiet power of women continues shaping the future in ways the legends haven't yet learned to sing. You drift away from the newly married couple's doorway, letting the crisp evening air cool your skin as you follow the soft echo of children's laughter down a narrow path. The settlement spreads before you, the earthy scent of clay, wool, and wood smoke curling together like a sleepy embrace. As you move, the rhythm of early Roman life shifts again, guiding you toward a place where influence hides in plain sight, the world of mothers raising the next generation of Roman citizens. You follow a small group of children tumbling over each other like excited puppies. They dart into a courtyard where a woman stands with her hands on her hips, wearing the facial expression known universally across all centuries as I've told you 3 times already. You watch as she points to a pile of kindling, and the kids snap into action. Well, action, meaning they reluctantly shuffle over and pretend to be helpful. This is where Rome's future begins. Not in the Senate, not on the battlefield, but right here, with women guiding, teaching, and sometimes bribing children into becoming socially functional adults. People love talking about Roman generals, Roman kings, Roman politicians, but none of them exist without someone teaching them not to chew on firewood first. One mainstream historical fact sets the scene. Roman mothers, especially in the early period, were deeply involved in childhood education. Before tutors, before philosopher nannies, before elite schools, learning happened here, around the hearth, in the courtyard, during daily chores. Mothers taught language, religion, morals, etiquette, and most importantly, the essential skill of not embarrassing the family in public. You watch as the woman kneels beside one of the smaller children, showing him how to stack kindling just right. She's patient, calm, the kind of quietly attentive presence that shapes the foundation of a stable community. Her influence doesn't roar, it hums. Nearby, an older woman sits with a teenage boy who's practicing tying knots in a leather strap. He's trying to look impressive, but his hands keep fumbling, and his grandmother chuckles each time, softly, lovingly, but with the unmistakable vibe of someone who has tied thousands of knots, while half asleep. You sense in her a generational chain of knowledge passing forward, a wisdom earned through seasons of scarcity, conflict, and celebration. You move toward another cluster of mothers sitting in the shade, weaving cloth while watching their children perform an elaborate game that seems to involve running, yelling, and definitive rule-breaking. The mothers talk gently about food stores, about upcoming rituals, about that family whose dog keeps stealing laundry. But woven between these everyday concerns are lessons, warnings, and guidance meant for little ears that pretend not to listen, but absolutely do. And now for the quirky tidbit. Some early Romans believed that certain moral traits were physically passed from mother to child through breast milk. Courage, honesty, temperance. Imagine that. Your personality delivered like a biological software update. Modern scholars cringe at the science, but the symbolism shows how much value early Romans placed on the maternal role in forming character. A small boy runs past you, arms full of sticks, tripping over absolutely nothing in particular. His mother sighs the sigh of mothers across all time and gestures him back for a redo. She's shaping persistence, even if she doesn't call it that. Historians still argue whether early Roman mothers held more influence over their children's development than the later emphasis on fathers suggests. Some point to inscriptions celebrating mothers' virtues, others argue these were exceptions. But standing here, watching these women teach everything from don't steal figs to offer thanks to the household gods, you feel how essential their guidance really is. You step into a home where a mother is teaching her daughter how to grind grain. The rhythm is soft, steady, scrape, turn, scrape, turn. The mother's voice is a low murmur, explaining not just the technique but the reasons, keeping the family fed, storing grain safely, sharing with neighbours in need. These lessons aren't chores. They're community infrastructure passed down through generations. The girl asks a question, and the mother pauses, considers, then answers in a way that blends practicality with care. Exactly the kind of response that helps a child feel steady in a world full of uncertainty. Early Rome isn't safe or predictable or even particularly organised, but a mother's guidance is a compass. You cross into another courtyard where a different mother is teaching her children religious rites. How to sprinkle grain on the hearth, how to offer thanks to the spirits, how to whisper a request for protection. The children mimic her gestures with the seriousness of small acolytes. The moment feels intimate and ancient, a thread stretching from past to future. And then, in classic child fashion, one kid sneezes directly into the offering bowl. The mother sighs and restarts the ritual. You can't help but smile. Even sacred tradition can't escape the chaos of kids. As you step back into the open air, you sense the cumulative weight of all this quiet guidance. It doesn't make headlines, mostly because Rome hasn't invented headlines yet, but it shapes everything. The way these children grow, the values they carry, the decisions they'll make as adults. All of it is infused with the lessons of their mothers and grandmothers. A man passes by carrying tools, glancing at the courtyard scenes with mild confusion, as if wondering how children can simultaneously learn nothing and everything at once. But the women understand. This is long-term work, slow and subtle, like planting seeds in soil you may never see bloom. You turn one last time to watch a mother steady her child's hand on the grinding stone, her voice soft as woven wool. She's raising a future citizen, someone who will shape Rome's destiny in ways even myths can't predict. And you feel it, the heartbeat of early Rome, pulsing in the quiet power of women who build the future one child, one moment, one gentle correction at a time. You let the courtyard sounds drift behind you, children arguing about whose turn it is to ruin the kindling pile, mothers whispering blessings, elders humming soft reminders of tradition, and you follow a narrow footpath that curves toward a quieter corner of the settlement. The air here feels different, heavier with meaning. You sense it before you see it. A small cluster of sacred spaces marked by smooth stones, carved wooden posts, and the faint smell of smoke lingering like a gentle veil. You're approaching one of the places where early Roman women held a kind of influence that even the most boastful men respected. The realm of priestesses, hearth guardians, and spiritual caretakers of the state. The power here doesn't shout, it resonates. As you step into the clearing, you see a group of women gathered around a low altar. Their movements are slow, deliberate, almost meditative. They sprinkle grain, pour wine, and whisper prayers so softly the words dissolve into the air. You stand far enough back to avoid interfering, because even as a hypothetical time traveller, you can feel the vibe. Don't mess with ritual space. A woman steps forward, holding a clay bowl filled with offerings. Her posture is calm, steady, confident. She's not a queen, not a noble, just a woman entrusted with a spiritual role. And here's the thing. In early Rome, that meant something. Quite a lot, actually. One mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Early Roman religion was household-centered. Every family maintained its own rituals, hearth spirits and ancestors. Women, especially matrons, were responsible for managing these rites, ensuring the gods remained on speaking terms with the household, and considering how quickly life could collapse in early Rome, raids, storms, disease, your neighbour's goat eating your grain, keeping the gods happy was the closest thing they had to insurance. You notice, smaller structure off to the side. A woman kneels beside a hearth fire inside, feeding it thin twigs that crackle softly. She's chanting under her breath, eyes half closed. This isn't just a fire, it's the symbolic heart of the community. If the flame dies, bad things happen, and everyone knows bad things love any excuse. The quirky tidbit of the day, some early Roman priestesses carried small fire-starting kits made of flint, dried moss and resin. Not only were they keepers of the flame, but they were literal walking backup generators, human in case of emergency buttons. If someone's hearth fire went out, you'd run to them, hoping they could relight your domestic universe before disaster settled in. A pair of men walk by the sacred area and immediately quiet down mid-sentence. They lower their heads slightly, not in fear but in respect. Even the loudest men knew that messing up a woman's ritual could mean trouble, spiritual, social, or even physical if the matron was particularly irritated. After all, nothing intimidates like a woman who knows exactly how to summon divine disapproval. You hear soft footsteps behind you. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, carries a bundle of herbs. She moves with the careful precision of an apprentice who both wants to get everything right and is terrified of dropping anything. She kneels beside the altar, placing rosemary and laurel onto the stone. The scent drifts upward, warm and earthy. You watch her face as she concentrates. She's not just learning ritual technique, she's learning composure, responsibility, the ability to hold the community's trust in her hands. Early Rome didn't hand out roles like this casually. A girl chosen for ritual duties was someone the community saw potential in. Steadiness, intuition, maybe even that mysterious ability to sense when someone was lying about who ate the last piece of bread. A breeze rustles the leaves overhead, and for a moment the entire sacred space feels suspended in time. You close your eyes, listening. Crackle of fire, murmur of prayers, the soft brush of a hand arranging offerings. It's peaceful, grounding, the opposite of the chaotic energy outside. Historians still argue whether women's spiritual authority in early Rome was inherited from Etruscan religious traditions, where female priestesses were more prominent, or whether the influence developed organically within Roman practice. The evidence is light, scattered, and often contradictory. But as you stand here, you feel what scholars can't always measure, the emotional and symbolic weight these women carried. You wander toward a second altar, smaller and more domestic. A group of mothers stands around it, holding small statues of household deities. They're performing a rite for safe childbirth, something critical in a society where danger lurks in every season. You hear the soft syllables of their chant, rhythmic and soothing. A young mother steps forward, cradling a newborn, wrapped tightly in cloth. Her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of love and responsibility. The priestess guides her through the ritual, touching the baby's forehead with a mixture of olive oil and herbs. The newborn squeaks in protest, immediately launching the first ever recorded Roman complaint about being too cold. As you watch, you feel the subtle truth settle into your bones. Early Roman women weren't simply participants in religious life, they were its anchors. They maintained rites, protected sacred spaces, tended fires that symbolized stability, and ensured that daily life flowed in harmony with the spiritual world. You step back, giving space to the rituals as they continue. One woman replaces a worn offering dish with a fresh one. Another sweeps ashes from the altar with a brush of woven reeds. Every movement is small, but essential. These acts, the ones almost nobody writes about, are the quiet glue holding the community together. A priestess glances at you from across the space. She doesn't frown. She doesn't smile either. She simply acknowledges you the way a guardian acknowledges someone passing through her domain. You nod respectfully because she radiates the energy of someone who would absolutely scold a god if the god got out of line. As you turn to leave, the fire glows brighter behind you, casting a warm halo over the sacred grounds. The women continue their chants, steady as the heartbeat of early Rome, and you walk on, feeling the hum of feminine power trailing after you like a soft cloak, subtle, spiritual, and strong enough to outlast the rise and fall of kings. You follow the curve of the settlement's sacred path until the air shifts again, lighter this time, breezier, almost like the world is holding its breath. You don't hear chanting now. Instead, there's a soft, steady hush, the kind of quiet that feels intentional. You know where you're heading even before the structure comes into view, the precinct of the Vestal Virgins, or at least the early prototype of what this institution will eventually become. It's smaller than the grand temples you've seen in documentaries. No marble columns, no precise geometric courtyards, no architecture designed to make you feel like a poorly dressed tourist. Just a sheltered hearth, a cleanly swept courtyard, and a circle of women whose presence radiates the strange combination of serenity and unspoken authority. You approach carefully. Even without the full institution built yet, the energy is unmistakable. This is the realm of women who hold a paradoxical kind of power, ritual purity combined with political weight, vulnerability paired with legal privileges men secretly envy. A young Vestal sits near the hearth, feeding the sacred flame with slow, deliberate motions. Her hair is bound neatly, her posture perfectly upright. You can tell she's been trained to move with intention, to breathe with awareness, to embody calm even when children outside are loudly arguing over who stole whose stick. In early Rome, these women occupy a space no one else does. Not wives, not mothers, not daughters confined to household rhythms. They are chosen, set apart, and given roles so vital that even kings and magistrates occasionally bow their heads around them. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Vestal virgins maintained the eternal flame of Rome, believed to safeguard the city's fortune. If the flame died, it wasn't just a household mishap, it symbolized cosmic imbalance, disaster, political shame, people whispering, well, this is how civilizations end. So the pressure was considerable. Yet as you stand here, you sense something deeper than duty. This fire is more than a symbol. It's an anchor. These women aren't just tending heat. They're tending the psychological center of a society terrified of chaos. You take a step closer, and one of the older Vestals glances your way. Not unkindly, just making sure you don't trip and fall directly into the sacred flame, because that would definitely cause paperwork. The quirky tidbit for this section arrives on cue. Vestals, even early ones, held rights that many Roman men would wistfully daydream about. The ability to own property independently, special seats at events, legal safeguards that shielded them from the usual, why are you out without a male relative? Nonsense. Imagine being so respected that the city literally stops traffic for you. That's the vibe. But the paradox cuts both ways. Their power comes wrapped in extreme constraints. No marriage, no children, no scandal, no mistakes. Their lives are balanced on a thin line, and even minor mishaps could become major crises. You sense it in the way they move, controlled, serene, but always aware. One girl, maybe 13, maybe 14, sits to the side polishing a ceremonial bowl. She hums softly, but every so often she glances at the older priestesses as if checking whether her song is too cheerful, too loud, too anything. She's learning the delicate dance between duty and identity, between communal reverence and personal sacrifice. Historians still argue whether Vestals wielded genuine political influence or whether their authority has been exaggerated by modern storytellers fascinated with the idea of powerful ancient women. Some scholars point to their involvement in treaties and major state rituals. Others insist their impact was symbolic. Standing here, you feel the truth lies somewhere in the quiet space between. Because when a community believes you're spiritually essential, you become politically significant, even if no one calls it that. A soft gust of wind brushes your cheek, carrying the scent of burning oak. The fire crackles, a tiny sound, but in this space, it feels monumental. A Vestal leans forward, shields it with her hand, and gently adds a thin piece of kindling. The flame perks up immediately, as if remembering its job. You watch the ritual for a few minutes, mesmerized by its simplicity. No grand speeches, no trumpets, just discipline, devotion, and a soft flame that refuses to be extinguished. Then something small happens, barely noticeable. One of the younger girls sneezes, loudly. The priestess beside her flinches, then tries to hide her laughter. The younger girl's face turns beet red, clearly convinced she has angered every deity simultaneously. The priestess gives her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Even sacred institutions allow for human moments. You take a slow breath, absorbing the scene. These women live a life that is both elevated and constrained. People revere them, yet they walk a narrow path. They hold ceremonial power, yet personal freedoms are limited. They command respect, yet they tread carefully. And somehow, that contradictory equilibrium keeps Rome's spiritual heart beating. As the sun starts dipping behind the hills, the fire glows brighter, casting warm halos on the priestesses' faces. They look almost otherworldly, not supernatural but deeply grounded, woven into the structure of early Roman life like threads of steady gold. You turn away, letting the warmth fade from your skin as you follow the path out of the sacred precinct. Behind you, the flame continues its eternal dance, tended by hands both gentle and powerful, and you walk on, deeper into the story of early Rome's women, the ones whose strength may be quiet, but whose influence burns steadily, impossible to extinguish. You drift away from the sacred hush of the Vestal hearth and follow a dusty footpath that leads downhill toward a part of early Rome that hums with a very different rhythm. The quiet chanting fades, replaced by low bargaining voices, clinking pottery, goats making questionable life choices, and the unmistakable chaos of market day. The beating, bustling artery of daily life. The moment you step into the open clearing, a swarm of motion surrounds you. Stalls that are technically just cloth thrown over crates. Makeshift counters built from whatever wood someone could borrow without asking questions. People bartering with hand gestures so dramatic it feels like you've stumbled into an ancient improv class. But the real current, the real movers of this space, are the women. Market day isn't just commerce, it's communication, reputation, and quiet influence braided together, and women run it with the same calm precision a conductor uses to guide an orchestra, except with more yelling and the occasional chicken trying to escape. You drift to the side to watch a woman selling woven cloth. She has the pleasant, sharp-eyed composure of someone who knows every trick in the book and has personally invented a few more. Her hands move over her wares with the pride of an artist, but her ears, always listening. Buyers approach with confident smiles. They leave humbled, carrying less coin than they intended, and a product that somehow feels like the exact thing they needed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In early Rome, women, especially non-elite women, participated heavily in local trade. They sold cloth, bread, herbs, pottery, small crafted goods. Some even ran modest marketplaces attached to their homes. And while Roman law often pretended women weren't official economic agents, everyone in practice knew better. The marketplace would collapse without them. As you wander, you catch sight of a group of women standing at a vegetable stall talking over one another with the excitement of a group chat that suddenly discovered scandal. They toss glances at passers-by and lower their voices at just the right moments. This, right here, is one of the most underrated powers in Rome. Information networks run through casual conversation. It's not gossip. No, gossip is light, fluffy, and fueled by boredom. This is intelligence, neighborhood dynamics, subtle negotiation, quiet reputations formed and unformed with a single whisper. People underestimate women's market day networks at their own peril. Now for the quirky tidbit. Early Roman women used the market not only for shopping and selling, but as a subtle matchmaking arena. A mother might accidentally bump into another family while inspecting figs, sparking a conversation that gently steers two young people toward a future marriage deal. Imagine Tinder, but with more fruit and far more parental involvement. You pass a stall where a woman grinds herbs with expert precision. Her hands move quickly, and the air fills with the sharp scent of rosemary and wild garlic. A man approaches, trying, to haggle aggressively. The woman raises one eyebrow. Just one. The argument ends immediately. You can practically hear the negotiating gods applauding her technique. Historians still argue whether these market interactions gave women genuine social leverage, or whether men retained ultimate control through property laws. The answer is muddied. Documents reflect legal reality, but lived experience speaks differently. Watching this scene unfold, you understand. Women shape the rhythm of trade by knowing who needs what, who owes whom, and who has mysteriously been shortchanging customers with watered-down wine. Speaking of wine, you wander to a small kiosk where a woman in a faded red shawl pours samples from a clay jug. She's charismatic, loud in a warm way, the kind of person who can draw a crowd with a raised eyebrow. She offers you a sip. It tastes like someone left grapes in a warm basket and decided to call the result vintage. You cough. She pats your back like she's comforted dozens of victims before. Business continues. A group of young girls weave between the stalls with baskets, delivering goods purchased by women who don't have time to run errands because they're too busy negotiating, mediating disputes, or overseeing the quality of olive oil like high-stakes inspectors. The girls listen closely, learning the rhythms of trade, the subtle art of reading people, the quiet game of social chess that underlies every sale. A woman across the market suddenly shouts, waving a clay pot with a chip in it. A few heads turn. Another woman counters the complaint with an argument so fast and sharp you're sure she prepares speeches in advance. Conflict resolved, reputation preserved. You can't help but suspect that the Senate, centuries later, will operate with far less efficiency than this group of women sorting out pottery drama. Toward the edge of the marketplace, a grandmotherly figure sits on a low stool selling small talismans, carved bones, little bundles of herbs, bits of polished stone. People stop by in a steady stream, each hoping for good fortune or protection. She listens to their concerns, nods sagely, and hands them precisely the charm they need, even if it's objectively just a rock that happens to be particularly smooth. Sometimes reassurance is the real product. You step back to take in the entire scene, the movement, the noise, the undercurrent of female authority running like a river beneath it all. Women here are more than vendors. They're managers of social cohesion, brokers of information, negotiators of disputes, voices of continuity in a noisy, unpredictable world. You watch as a few women gather their goods at the end of the day, laughing as they pack up baskets. Their laughter is light, but their influence is full of gravity. Men might make laws, but women make daily life work. And as the marketplace slowly empties, you feel the day's energy settling into the dust. Patterns of trade, networks of trust. Quiet power shaped in the open air yet rarely acknowledged by history. You head back toward the hill, the smell of herbs and warm bread still lingering on your clothes. Behind you, women sweep their stalls, tie up their bundles, and head home with the calm satisfaction of people who shape a society without needing statues or speeches. Their power is woven into conversation, negotiation, and the pulse of the community. Subtle, steady, and as essential as the marketplace itself. You leave the fading buzz of the marketplace behind, stepping onto a quieter path lined with drying herbs and narrow gardens. The scent changes as you walk, less of roasted grain and spiced wine, more of crushed mint, wild fennel, and earth warmed by the sun. You feel it immediately. You're approaching the domain of early Rome's healers and midwives, the women whose hands steadied the line between life and death, long before medicine had anything resembling a plan. A soft breeze brushes past you, carrying the faint rhythmic sound of grinding, stone against stone. You follow it toward a modest hut where two women kneel beside a flat slab of rock, breaking down dried leaves into dust with slow, practiced circles. Their movements are calm, but beneath that calmness lies a truth anyone in early Rome would tell you. These women matter more than almost anyone else. Inside the hut, the air is warm, dense with the smell of boiling roots. A clay pot sits over a low fire, bubbling with a mixture that looks like medicine if you're optimistic and like trouble if you're honest. One of the women stirs it with a carved wooden spoon, pausing occasionally to check its colour. She's looking for something specific, an earthy tone, the right thickness, the right smell. One mainstream historical fact. Early Roman women handled most healthcare within the household. They were caregivers, herbalists, midwives, bone setters, fever watchers, and sometimes miracle workers. Their knowledge came from generations of trial, error, and whispered advice, passed down through mothers, aunts, neighbours, and the occasional wandering wise woman who traded tips for honey or shelter. You move carefully into the space. Shelves line the walls, cluttered with pottery jars sealed with wax. Some hold dried leaves. Others store oils, seeds, powders, and mysterious lumps that look like they were harvested from the Don't Ask section of nature. Above your head, herbs hang in bundles, lavender, rue, bay, and a few unidentifiable plants that make you question whether ancient Rome invented the first version of energy drinks. A girl, maybe 10 years old, sits in the corner crushing something with a small mortar. She works with the seriousness of a child who understands that this is important, that mistakes matter, that people depend on what she's helping create. Her teacher glances over and nods approval. Skills like these begin young. The quirky tidbit arrives with perfect timing, some Roman. Remedies included powdered mouse, crushed oyster shells, or bits of burnt wool. Before you judge, remember your own timeline includes kale smoothies, so maybe everyone has their weird phases. You step closer to the boiling pot. The healer lifts a ladle and lets the mixture drip back in thin strings. She murmurs something under her breath, testing the brew. Her focus is intense. You can see how many lives she's held in her hands, and how much weight she carries without fanfare. Outside, you hear a low groan. A young man lies stretched on a woven mat, clutching his ankle. A sprain, probably. Or maybe he fell off a stubborn goat again. His mother kneels beside him, brushing his hair back with gentle worry. One of the healers steps outside, crouches and examines the swelling. Her hands move with confidence. Press here, feel there, rotate gently, listen to the way he hisses through his teeth. Historians still argue whether early Roman women had formalized healing roles, or whether their practices were more informal and domestic. Some point to evidence of female medical practitioners in inscriptions. Others say the knowledge was shared communally. But as you watch the healer bind the young man's ankle with a strip of cloth soaked in cooling herbs, the academic debate feels distant. Her authority is undeniable. When she speaks, people listen. Inside, another woman enters carrying a basket of fresh-picked plants. She sets it beside the fire and begins sorting, roots to dry, leaves to grind, flowers for infusions. She talks quietly with the others, exchanging updates like colleagues at a morning meeting. A neighbour's fever has broken, an infant is teething and miserable, a woman is due to give birth soon. The rhythm of their conversation is soft, but the stakes are enormous. You're invited, wordlessly, to sit near the hearth and watch. The healer gestures toward a clay bowl filled with a thick green paste. She scoops some with her fingers and spreads it onto a linen strip, explaining in slow, deliberate motions meant for the girl across the room, but helpful for you too. For burns, she indicates, mimicking the application on an imaginary wound. It smells sharp, slightly sweet, faintly smoky. You resist the urge to taste it because you value your continued existence. Suddenly a low cry pierces the quiet. A woman arrives at the doorway clutching her belly. One of the healers steps forward instantly. No panic, just motion. She supports the woman's weight, guiding her inside with a steady hand and low voice. The other healers begin preparing, clearing space, heating water, laying out cloths. They move like a single organism, synchronized from years of shared experience. This is midwifery, raw and real. In a world where childbirth can turn dangerous without warning, these women are the closest thing people have to lifelines. Their knowledge is a tapestry woven from observation, intuition, and spiritual belief. They've seen enough. Births to know what's normal, what's troubling, what needs calm reassurance, and what needs swift action. You step back, giving space. The labouring woman breathes in short gasps. One healer supports her shoulders, another massages her lower back with slow circular motions, another prepares herbal tea meant to ease the tension. A grandmotherly figure murmurs prayers over a tiny figurine of a household goddess. This is sacred work, not because of temples, but because of life itself. Minutes stretch, voices soften, the hut fills with expectation. Then a new sound, thin, piercing, unmistakably alive. A newborn's cry. Relief floods the room like warm sunlight. The mother sags, exhausted. The healers smile, small, tired, triumphant. They wrap the newborn carefully, examining, assessing, humming soothing notes. You watch with quiet awe. For all Rome's future grandeur, its marble, its armies, its politics, nothing is more fundamental than this moment, repeated thousands of times by women whose names history rarely records. As you step outside, letting the fresh air fill your lungs, you feel the weight of what you've witnessed. Not dramatic power, not performative authority, but skill, care, and presence. The kind that sustains a community from the inside out. Behind you, the healers continue their work, grinding herbs, stirring remedies, whispering prayers that blend science, superstition, and love. They are the pulse beneath Rome's early heartbeat, quiet, constant, essential. You walk on, feeling their influence linger like the scent of rosemary on your clothes, guiding you toward the next hidden corner of early Rome where women wield power in ways the official records never quite capture. You follow a winding dirt path out of the healer's quarter, feeling the atmosphere shift once again. Less of herbs and warm steam, more of dust, wind, and the distant thud of tools hitting earth. Early Rome, for all its sacred spaces and bustling markets, is still a frontier community, and the soundscape reflects that. Animals bleating, carts creaking, someone arguing loudly with a donkey that absolutely does not care. But somewhere between these familiar noises, you notice an emptiness. Fewer men, fewer voices with that particular mix of bravado and bad timing. It hits you after a few steps. War season has begun. Rome's men are gone, off marching, training, or posturing dramatically on a hillside somewhere. And back here in the settlement, women are holding the entire world together. Not symbolically, not emotionally, literally. You reach a terrace overlooking a patchwork of fields. Women are scattered across the landscape like purposeful dots of colour, tending crops, carrying baskets, repairing fences, driving stubborn oxen who obviously missed their usual handlers. This is the side of early Roman life rarely glorified, yet utterly essential. A woman near the field's edge glances up at you. She's holding a wooden hoe, leaning on it for a heartbeat's rest. Sweat beads along her brow, but her expression is steady, composed, someone who's done this 1,000 times without waiting for applause. She turns back to her work, rhythmically breaking the soil, feeding the settlement's future one stroke at a time. One mainstream historical fact: when Roman men marched off, whether to fight neighbours, defend territory, or engage in the ancient sport of declaring war because someone looked at us wrong, women took over the farms. They planted, harvested, repaired tools, managed livestock, oversaw slaves, and handled finances. Without them, food production would collapse, morale would crumble, and returning soldiers would come home to a settlement running on fumes. You head down the hillside into the fields. A woman drags a rake across the ground with her daughter at her side. The girl mimics every motion, sometimes clumsy, sometimes precise. She's learning what every future matron must. Survival depends on competence, not ceremony. You step carefully, trying not to crush any precious green shoots, but somehow you manage to find the one loose rock in the entire field and skid several inches. A woman pauses mid-task, gives you the seriously look, then goes back to work. You bow your head in humble acknowledgement of your own uselessness. All around you, the early Rome you saw before, the spiritual Rome, the domestic Rome, the market Rome, condenses into something sharper. This is the Rome that doesn't pause for war, it adapts to it. A group of women gather beside a small shed, repairing harnesses and sharpening tools. Their hands move confidently. They share jokes, though their laughter carries a layer of resilience. Beneath it, someone tells a story about her husband trying to saddle a mule backward before he left. Everyone shakes their heads affectionately, united in the universal truth that men, regardless of century, sometimes make questionable decisions. The quirky tidbit emerges naturally. Some Roman women left woven tokens on the doorposts, small knotted charms meant to protect husbands marching to battle. These weren't grand spells or elite rituals, just quiet gestures of hope, and sometimes those knots carried embedded messages known only to the couple. Early Rome's version of text me when you get there, but in fibre arts. You tread toward a fenced area where a widow tends her goats. She moves, with the slow, careful sturdiness of someone used to doing every task alone. Her eldest son left with the militia despite being barely old enough to hold a spear straight. She pretends she isn't worried, but her eyes keep flicking toward the hills. Not to look for him, she knows he won't return for months, but because she's checking the weather. Storms can kill crops faster than enemy tribes. Historians still argue whether the absence of men during wartime gave women broader social authority or merely shoved extra burdens onto their shoulders. Some say women gained temporary independence. Others argue they were just doing triple the labour for the same limited recognition. You sense both things are true at once. Women here carry responsibility like a shield, even when no one names it as power. You stroll toward a small granary hut where women are inspecting the season's stores. They lift sacks, sniff grains, test for pests, trade notes. One woman scribbles tallies on a wax tablet with a stylus shaped like a tiny spear, a gift from her husband, who insisted she shouldn't have to use boring tools. She uses it anyway, smirking. Inside the hut, the air is cool and dusty. A matron oversees everything like a general surveying her troops. She knows exactly which families will need help, which fields are struggling, which households produced surplus last season. She also knows which husband bragged about his farming skills, but actually left his wife to do 95% of the work. Spoiler, most of them. You step out into the sunlight again. Children run past you, carrying wooden shields made from scrap planks. They're practicing battle formations, which look suspiciously like tag but with more shrieking. Their older sisters watch them with mild amusement while weaving baskets, their fingers moving lightning fast even as they laugh at the boys' dramatic collapse onto the ground. On a ridge above the fields, a woman stands with a scroll in her hands. She's reading a message delivered by a traveller, news from the men's distant camp. Her face flickers through a range of emotions: relief, worry, pride, irritation, joy. Other women gather around, leaning in, supporting one another with small gestures, hands brushing shoulders, arms Around waists murmured reassurances. These moments, shared, quiet, threaded with uncertainty, bind women even more tightly to one another. Their networks aren't formal councils, but they function like one, advising, comforting, planning. As you climb back toward the settlement, you pause for one last glance at the fields. Women straighten from their work, stretch aching backs, wipe sweat from their faces, and then keep going. Because if they don't, no one will. Early Rome's wars might shape its borders, but women shape its continuity. They are the ones who keep homes warm, fields alive, children fed, and the future possible, all while the official histories attribute victory to men who weren't even here to plant the crops. You step away, the scent of turned earth clinging to your clothes, and follow the path onward, toward the next hidden current beneath Rome's surface, where women weave influence not with swords or laws, but with quiet, unwavering competence. You follow the footpath upward from the fields, dust clinging to your sandals, the sun sliding lower in the sky like it's too tired to argue with gravity anymore. As you walk, the noises of daily labour fade. No more goats protesting their existence, no more tools scraping earth, replaced by a softer kind of sound. Murmurs, laughter, the faint clink of cups shared in shaded courtyards. You're entering the world of patronage, but not the statues and senatorial kind you usually hear about. No marble pillars here, no grand speeches, no togas swirling dramatically in the breeze. This is the quiet, subtle, endlessly clever realm where elite Roman women exercise influence through favours, networks, and whispered alliances. And honestly, it's fascinating. Because while men boast loudly about their connections, women build networks so resilient you could mistake them for spider silk, delicate looking but strong enough to hold families, neighbours, and entire communities together. You step into a courtyard shaded by a vine-laden pergola. Beneath it sits a matrona, a wealthy, respected woman with the calm confidence of someone who's been managing other people's nonsense for decades. She's talking to a young mother holding a swaddled infant. The young woman shifts nervously, clutching the baby like she expects to drop him at any moment. The matrona listens with a serene half-smile, nodding slowly, offering advice that sounds gentle but carries the weight of real support. This is patronage, female style. One mainstream historical fact. Roman society ran on a system of obligations and favours, clientela, usually described as male-dominated. Patron men supported client families politically, legally, economically. But in practice, elite women maintained parallel networks, arranging matches, smoothing disputes, placing young relatives in good households, distributing food in hard seasons, and whispering influence in the right ears at the right dinner gatherings. You drift closer, and the matrona's voice becomes clearer. And tell your husband not to worry about the grain debt. I'll speak to his cousin. He always listens to me. The young mother exhales. Relief, gratitude, something softer. The matrona squeezes her arm, dismissing her with a kindness that feels almost ceremonial. When the woman leaves, others step into the courtyard. 2 neighbours, 1 teenage boy carrying a scroll, a merchant's wife with a basket of figs. The matrona receives each with that same gracious, attentive energy. She listens, assesses, and issues decisions with the ease of someone who runs a household, a business, and a small social universe simultaneously. She's not a politician, but she influences them. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Archaeologists have found small clay tokens and written notes suggesting that elite Roman women often exchanged gifts strategically. Perfumed oils, small silver pieces, fine cloth, creating webs of goodwill. Social currency, early Rome style. You're basically watching the beta version of corporate networking, but with fewer business cards and more olive oil. The teenage boy hands the matrona the scroll. She opens it with practiced grace. Her eyebrows lift slightly. Amusement, perhaps. She calls for her daughter, a girl around 15 with the posture of someone trained in grace first, panic later. The daughter reads the message. A local dispute. 2 families claiming ownership of a shared boundary fence. The matrona gives her daughter a look that says, "You'll handle this one." And the girl nods, ready to step into the subtle art of community diplomacy. Historians still argue whether female patronage truly shaped political life or merely influenced social dynamics. Some claim women quietly steered outcomes behind the scenes. Others say their sway was limited to domestic concerns. But standing here, watching this Matrona deploy wisdom, humour, and a well-timed compliment to change the flow of events, you feel the truth whispering. Influence doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. You wander with the daughter as she heads toward the feuding families. She carries no weapons, just a small tablet, some charcoal, and the confidence of someone who knows half the settlement's disputes get resolved by women who aren't supposed to be in charge, but absolutely are. She speaks to the two men who are arguing so loudly you can hear them before you even see them. They're gesturing wildly at a fence post, as if it personally betrayed them. She raises her hand gently, not a command, just a signal to breathe. Somehow, both men quiet down. Maybe it's respect. Maybe they're afraid she'll tell their wives. Within minutes, she's traced the lines of the family's old agreements, added a compromise so elegant you'd think she had a degree in ancient conflict resolution, and secured both parties' reluctant approval. The dispute dissolves. The men shake hands. One mutters something about not wanting to anger the gods. The other mutters something about not wanting to anger his wife. The girl returns home, her shoulders lighter. Her mother greets her with a proud nod, not dramatic, just enough to say, "Well done." You can tell this is training, shaping her daughter into the next generation's quiet influencer. A group of women bring offerings, fresh cheese, cloth, herbs, to the Matrona, thanking her for helping arrange a marriage last season, or for sending herbs when illness struck, or for ensuring a neighbour stopped blocking the shared well with his inexplicably large pots. She waves them off with a humble smile, but you see it. These gestures aren't flattery. They're loyalty. This is how networks form, not by force, not by decree, but by competence, care, and the subtle balancing of social scales. As the sun dips lower, the Matrona pours a cup of diluted wine, inviting a handful of women to sit with her. They talk about their families, about community needs, about which household might need help next winter. The conversation flows smoothly, unhurried, weaving threads of support and strategy without ever outright calling it strategy. Men might debate politics loudly in public, but women shape community politics through relationships, intuition, and the quiet art of being indispensable. You sit for a moment at the courtyard's edge, absorbing the atmosphere, the warm dusk, the soft laughter, the undercurrent of coordination that keeps early Rome from dissolving into conflict and chaos. When you finally stand and move on, you realize something important. Rome's stability doesn't rest on kings or heroes or warlords. It rests on networks, woven, maintained, and strengthened by women who understand that power doesn't need a title to be real. You walk on, deeper into early Rome's subtle machinery, where women continue to build the foundations of a world that centuries later will pretend they weren't there at all. You leave the shaded courtyard of patronage behind and wander toward a broader sunlit street, if you can call it a street. Really, it's more like a dusty suggestion of where people should walk, framed by adobe walls and the occasional very confused chicken. The afternoon light stretches long shadows across the ground, turning every figure you pass into a moving silhouette. And among these silhouettes, one detail draws your eye: the unmistakable shape of a Roman Matrona, her clothing speaking louder than her voice ever needs to. You've reached the part of early Rome where women's influence isn't whispered or woven into quiet conversations. It's displayed. Clothing, posture, ritual gestures, how a woman stands in public, how she turns her head, how she carries her spindle or folds her cloak. It all broadcasts information, subtle but powerful. Status, morality, dignity, expectations, respect, sometimes fear. Because in a world without Instagram, your outfit is your announcement. A woman passes by wearing a long, carefully pleated stola, the garment reserved for respectable married women. It drapes gracefully, giving her a statuesque look, even though she's literally just walking to barter for eggs. But those pleats? They're sending messages. I am respectable. I am connected. I know how to fold wool evenly, which in ancient Rome was practically a superpower. One mainstream historical fact: the stola and palla weren't just clothes, they were legal symbols. They marked a woman's marital status, her family's social class, and her moral standing. Wearing them correctly wasn't vanity, it was identity, reputation, and sometimes protection. Men had to read these silent signals because women in public life were expected to communicate their place in society without speaking out of turn. You walk behind the stola-clad Matrona as she steps into a small public gathering, women chatting in the thin shade of an awning. The moment she arrives, the dynamic shifts. Conversations soften, backs straighten. She isn't the group's leader by title, but social gravity bends around her like she's the sun in a tiny solar system. Nearby, a young unmarried woman adjusts her hair, ensuring her head covering sits just right. She glances at the older matron with a look that says, "Am I doing this correctly? Am I presenting myself well?" The older woman gives her a small nod, and the girl visibly relaxes. Social performance, subtle, steady, unspoken. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Early Roman women sometimes used the placement of their palla, their cloak, to send coded signals. Slightly forward to indicate modesty, draped back to signal openness in conversation, held tight when annoyed or wary. Basically, ancient Rome invented body language TikTok. You move through the small crowd noticing more layers of this quiet communication. A wealthy woman's palla is dyed a deep, warm saffron. Expensive, rare, a symbol of her family's resources. Another woman wears a lighter, washed-out version. A nod to the fashion, but within her means. Status, expressed with fibre. And then there's posture. You see it instantly. Elite Roman women practice a certain elegance. Not stiff, not pompous, but controlled, measured. Shoulders back, chin level, steps deliberate. It's a way of saying, I belong in this space. People watch me. I expect to be treated with dignity. It's easy to underestimate how powerful posture can be in a society obsessed with public perception. Historians still argue whether these outward displays gave women real influence or simply reinforced the roles society assigned them. Some scholars say there was power in moral visibility. Women shaped communities by embodying ideals. Others insist this was symbolic only, a reflection of male expectations. But watching these women interact, how others defer to them, mirror them, seek their approval, you sense the truth. Symbolism is power, especially in a world where reputation can make or break families. You turn a corner and spot a young slave woman carrying a heavy basket. Her tunic is simpler, shorter, designed for movement. Her hair isn't braided with ribbons like the daughters of wealth. It's tied with a simple cord. And yet, even here, there's messaging. Slaves with tidy clothing reflect well on their mistress. A tightly arranged hair cord indicates discipline, pride, and the quiet power of competence. People watch how she moves too, judging the household she comes from. You step aside as an older matron strides past, accompanied by two female attendants. Her palla is wrapped over her head, as though shielding her from both the sun and the nonsense of daily life. Her expression radiates, I have somewhere important to be, but also I have no patience for your goats. Heads turn as she passes. Conversations pause. Even two men carrying firewood slow down, giving her space the way modern drivers part for an ambulance, except instead of sirens, she has sheer aura. She stops near a small shrine, adjusting her cloak in a deliberate gesture of reverence. Two other women imitate her posture immediately. Ritual propriety, public virtue, embodied morality. Every move she makes reinforces her household standing. You linger near a water fountain, watching as women come and go. You pick up on the rhythms, a subtle touch on a friend's elbow, comfort. A raised eyebrow at a neighbour, caution. A perfectly timed laugh, alliance. A half-turned shoulder, disapproval. A lowered gaze, deflection or modesty. A straightened back, resistance or determination. Words are optional. Clothing and gestures do most of the talking. A teenage girl practices carrying a water jar on her shoulder. Her mother coaches her gently. Straighten your spine. Step softly. Look ahead. Not because there's a beauty contest, but because every public movement contributes to how she will be perceived as marriageable, respectable, capable. You notice how these women constantly read each other. Tiny details, slight shifts. It's like watching a whole social language play out in silence, and you're only beginning to understand the alphabet. As the afternoon cools, a small procession of women dressed in particularly fine stole passes by. They're heading toward a community gathering, maybe a religious festival, maybe a ritual meal. The stole sway with each step like banners of honor, People glance, people whisper, people notice. These women aren't commanding armies, they aren't drafting laws, they aren't standing at podiums, but they are shaping social norms, policing morality, crafting identity, modelling what Rome expects and what Rome aspires to. In a world where public image is everything, women hold the paintbrush. As you continue through the settlement, you feel the weight of this quiet influence. Every woven pleat, every gesture, every decision about how to present oneself. It all shapes Rome's social landscape, defining who is respected, who is suspect, who is trustworthy, and who is not. And with a soft exhale, you realize something profound. Sometimes the most powerful women aren't the ones with titles, but the ones everyone watches. You follow their flowing stole into the deepening afternoon, the whisper of woven cloth guiding you further into the life of early Rome, where appearance is language and women speak it fluently. You drift away from the sunlit street where stoles swayed like quiet banners and step into a different part of early Rome, one where the ground feels harder beneath your feet, where the buildings huddle closer, where the air holds a mix of wood smoke, sweat, and something else you can't quite name. This isn't the world of elite matrons or wealthy households. This is the world of slaves and freed women, where class sits heavy on every gesture, every breath, every choice. But if you listen closely, if you pay attention to the edges, the glances, the small strategies, you notice something unexpected. Even here, in the harshest social spaces, women carve out influence. Quietly, cleverly, unofficially, and sometimes with more creativity than any senator could dream of. You turn a corner and almost collide with a slave woman hauling a large amphora on her back. She steadies herself, shifting the weight with practiced ease. Her tunic is short, simple, meant for labour. Her hair is tied with a plain cord. Sweat beads on her forehead, but her gaze is sharp. She's scanning the street, reading people, calculating distances, watching for anything that might complicate her task. Slaves in early Rome carry the heaviest burdens, literally and socially. But women among them still find ways to adapt, resist, and in some cases, climb the fragile ladder toward freedom. One mainstream historical fact: manumission, the act of granting freedom, was common enough in early Rome that freed women formed a growing social class. They weren't equal to freeborn women, but they had far more autonomy than slaves. They could run small shops, manage households, form business partnerships, even buy their own slaves. Some became wealthier than freeborn families who spent their coins unwisely. Money talks, sometimes louder than ancestry. You watch a freed woman now sweeping the entrance of a modest little taberna, half tavern, half shop. She pauses to greet customers, handing a small boy a cup of watered wine much too confidently for someone his age. His mother snatches it back, scolding him with the tone of someone who doesn't trust him as far as she can throw him. The freed woman hides a smile. She's seen it all. Her clothing is nicer than a slave's. Still plain, but clean, dyed a soft brown. Her posture is relaxed, like someone who remembers the weight of chains and hasn't forgotten the feeling of being without them. She moves with purpose, managing transactions, taking inventory, whispering instructions to the girl helping her. A slave, but one she treats with surprising gentleness. A quirky tidbit now slips into view. Some freed women took on the religious roles their former mistresses ignored, serving as attendants in small cults, preparing ritual offerings, even leading rites in neighborhood shrines. This wasn't just piety, it was social strategy. A respected religious woman gained trust and visibility far faster than someone relying solely on business. You walk deeper into the neighborhood, where slave women scrub laundry by the river. Their arms move in steady, circular motions. Their hands roar from cold water and harsh soap made from ash. Yet their voices lift together in song, a melody that rises above the drudgery. It's a simple tune, but there's strength in it. Unity, subtle rebellion, a shared rhythm that makes the work bearable. One woman pauses to stretch her back, laughing at something a friend mutters. Another tosses her wet hair back with exaggerated flair, pretending to be a wealthy matrona. The others giggle. Even in hardship, humour survives. Rome didn't invent sarcasm, but they certainly perfected it. Among these women, social mobility is rare but never impossible. Some slaves hope for manumission. Some are saving coins granted by their masters. Some cultivate relationships, alliances that might one day lead to legal freedom. Others accept their fate but claim control in smaller ways, choosing friendships, shaping stories, teaching children, building informal networks. Historians still argue whether slave women had meaningful agency, or whether scholars today simply project modern ideas onto ancient suffering. Some say these women found micropockets of power. Others insist those pockets were illusions. But here, right now, you see it. Agency isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in a shared glance, a private joke, a small kindness, a refusal to break. You pass a small workshop where a skilled freedwoman carves bone hairpins, intricate shapes, tiny patterns, little animal figures. Her hands are quick, sure, graceful. Customers stop to admire them. She names her prices with a calm that borders on regal. She knows her worth, and because of her skill, others do too. A slave girl assists her, collecting scraps and organizing finished pieces. The freedwoman teaches her small techniques, how to smooth the bone, how to angle the knife, quiet mentorship. A tiny rebellion against the idea that skill belongs only to the free. A group of elite women passes by, inspecting the hairpins. They exchange soft compliments. They look at the freedwoman with polite nods, not warmth, but acknowledgement. The freedwoman curtsies slightly, carefully, just enough to honour the social hierarchy without appearing subservient. The balance is perfect. You continue walking, and the class lines grow sharper. A wealthy household's back entrance features a stream of slave women coming and going, fetching water, carrying baskets, preparing for the evening meal. Their mistress stands near the doorway, issuing instructions with clipped efficiency. She's not cruel, but she's firm. Her household is large and she runs it like military logistics. Even so, one slave woman, older with braided silver in her hair, stands close to the mistress, answering her questions, making suggestions, anticipating her needs. This is the vilica, the overseer, a slave, yes, but one with authority, respect, and the sharp intelligence of someone who can manage chaos with a raised eyebrow. You watch her direct the younger slaves, her tone brisk but not harsh. She's running the entire domestic system, and although she doesn't own her life, she certainly owns her role. As the sun leans further toward the horizon, you take in the mosaic of class, gender, and power around you. Slaves hauling water, freedwomen selling goods, elite matrons gliding past with practiced dignity, girls watching everything, learning from all of it. Even in the harshest corners of early Rome, women negotiate place, identity, and influence. Not equally, not freely, but persistently. You leave the crowded quarter with the lingering scent of river water and bone dust, knowing the story of Roman women is impossible to tell without these voices, the unseen foundations beneath every grand tale, every political shift, every rising empire, and you walk on, deeper into the layered world of early Rome, where women navigate boundaries not with force, but with resilience sharpened by necessity. You leave the dense, bustling quarters of slaves and freedwomen behind, stepping into a quieter, more fragrant part of the settlement. The air shifts, lighter, softer, touched with the faint smoke of incense and the earthy sweetness of crushed herbs. You follow the scent like a thread until it leads you to a small courtyard where sunlight falls in warm, golden shapes across the packed dirt. This is where early Roman women perform the rituals of daily worship, small acts that hold households together, protect families, reassure anxious hearts, and keep the world aligned just enough to stave off disaster. You've seen priestesses at temples, yes, but household rituals. These are far more intimate, woven into the fabric of everyday life like breath into lungs. You step into the courtyard, careful not to disturb the chalk markings on the ground. A woman kneels beside a low stone altar. Nothing grand, just a flat surface with a small clay statue perched on top. She places a pinch of flour on the altar, murmuring a prayer so soft it's almost a vibration instead of a sound. Her movements are practiced, gentle, serene. You watch her fingers sprinkle the offering with the same tenderness she'd use to soothe a child. One mainstream historical fact: ancient Roman religion was overwhelmingly domestic. Most worship didn't happen in big temples with professional priests. It happened in the home, multiple times a day, led almost entirely by women. They fed the hearth, honoured the ancestors, tended to the layers and penates, and kept spiritual order where chaos lurked constantly. You glance around the courtyard. Herbs hang from the eaves in bundles. A few clay bowls sit ready for offerings: oil, flour, fruit, or a bit of honey if someone's feeling particularly generous. A girl of about 8 stands nearby, holding a basket of small flowers. She watches her mother's movements intensely, absorbing each gesture like a lesson she'll repeat someday. In a world where disaster could come from rivals, weather, illness, or random cosmic mischief, these rituals aren't optional. They are survival. The woman finishes her offering, then stirs the small hearth fire with a flat stick. The flames rise a little, the smoke curling lazily upward. She whispers a protective phrase, a request for luck, health, harmony. Her daughter mimics the whispering, adding her own improvised version that's probably more wish than prayer. The mother smiles and gently adjusts the girl's hand placement. You feel a wave of warmth from the simplicity of it. Then you hear footsteps. Another woman arrives carrying a small clay cup filled with olive oil. She greets the first woman with a nod that says, "We've done this together 1,000 times." She pours a thin line of oil along the altar's edge, the scent rich and earthy. You step forward slightly to watch, but not too close. These spaces are sacred, and even as an observer, you feel compelled to tread lightly. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some early Roman women believed that if they offered the first bit of their morning bread to the household gods, the rest of the day would unfold without major disasters. Is it superstition? Maybe. But you've seen how chaotic early Rome can be. You'd offer bread too. You wander into the interior of the home, following the faint glow of firelight. The focus, the central hearth, crackles steadily. A small shelf above it holds tiny figurines, ancestors, protective spirits, maybe a god or two. Women tend this space throughout the day, feeding it bits of wood, sweeping its ashes, speaking to it in soft tones. Historians still argue whether these domestic rituals carried political significance or were purely personal. Some insist they were just household maintenance. Others argue they shaped family identity, social cohesion, and even moral norms. Standing here, watching a woman adjust the positioning of a figurine just so, you feel the deeper truth. Ritual gives people emotional architecture, structure, meaning, comfort. A young bride enters the room carrying a small bowl of salt. She sprinkles it into the hearth fire, whispering a hope that her husband returns safely from his journey. Then, in a move that surprises you, she tucks a small token beneath the firewood. A carved charm likely made by a relative. Hidden prayers, secret hopes, unrecorded power. Outside, 2 older women sit on a bench weaving wool while chanting a rhythmic invocation. Their voices rise and fall like the tide. One of them taps her heel against the ground with each beat, a subtle emphasis that reminds you of a metronome guiding musicians. Except here, the music is devotion. You sit beside a fig tree in the courtyard, watching the interplay of ritual and routine. A woman pauses from grinding grain to touch the altar lightly. Another pours a few drops of wine before taking her own sip. A girl kneels to tidy the area around the shrine, humming a tune that's likely hundreds of years old. These gestures are quick, quiet, woven into the day like invisible threads. Blink and you miss them. Look closer and you realize they are everywhere. You hear laughter, soft, reverent, the kind that comes from women sharing stories while preparing offerings. They speak about weather, family, chores, neighbors. Then one asks, "Did you hear the household spirit knock 3 times again last night?" The others murmur. One shrugs. "Probably the wind." Another leans closer. "Or a sign." They exchange glances, equal parts amused and cautious. Superstition and skepticism walk hand in hand. A group of boys passes outside the courtyard, shouting and flinging sticks at each other. One tries to run through the sacred area. A matron gives him a stare so powerful it should be classified as a divine weapon. He freezes mid-step, mumbles an apology, and retreats. Even mischievous children know better than to cross a woman guarding the household gods. The sun shifts overhead, casting patterned shadows across the ground. The women finish their rituals, tidy the space, and return to daily tasks. But the atmosphere remains changed, lighter, steadier, anchored by the prayers whispered into the fabric of the day. As you step back through the threshold, you realize something profound. While men chase glory in battles and politics, women uphold the rituals that give those pursuits meaning. They are guardians of memory, order, peace, and continuity. Not through spectacle, but through steady devotion. You walk on, feeling the lingering warmth of the hearth fire on your skin, following its gentle glow toward the next quiet corner of early Rome, where women reshape the world one unseen gesture at a time. You step away from the warm hearth light and wander back into the open air, where the scents of cooking grain, drying wool, and sun-warmed clay drift together in a sleepy haze. The settlement feels calmer now, less frantic activity, more steady rhythms. It's the kind of quiet that only comes when people are doing work so routine, so essential, that the whole community hums like a well-oiled loom. And this is where the hidden machinery of Rome truly lives, in the hands of women managing the domestic economy. Not housework in the small modern sense, but the colossal, never-ending management of resources, goods, production, storage, distribution, and survival. If the household is Rome in miniature, then women are its finance ministers, logistics officers, and long-term strategists. You walk down a narrow lane lined with woven mats, baskets, clay jars, and the occasional chicken that looks like it definitely has an attitude problem. Ahead, a woman sits beside a stack of amphorae, each sealed with wax marked with tiny symbols. She's checking each vessel, tapping the sides, weighing them, muttering calculations under her breath. You recognize. Immediately, she's doing inventory. One mainstream historical fact. Roman women, especially matrons, oversaw nearly every aspect of household economy. They measured grain, managed slaves and workers, organized cloth production, oversaw wine and oil storage, tracked debts, negotiated trades, monitored harvests, and supervised food preservation. The paterfamilias might legally own everything, but the materfamilias ran it. You approach quietly, watching as she opens a jar, sniffs the contents and nods. Olive oil, still fresh. Another jar contains grain, clean, dry, unspoiled. A third holds lentils. Nothing here is random, it's a system. Nearby, 3 girls sort wool by texture and cleanliness. One hums a rhythm while teasing apart tangled strands. Another measures lengths with a cord looped around her elbow. The third carefully winds thread into a tight, neat bundle. They're learning the art of cloth making, a central part of Rome's economy. Because clothing isn't just fashion, it's currency, identity, and winter protection. Their teacher, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and deft fingers, corrects their work without speaking. She just leans in, nudges a hand here, guides a thread there, like a conductor shaping music no one else can hear. You move deeper into the domestic quarter and find a group of women gathered around a large wooden table. On it lay several clay tablets inscribed with marks, household records, tally lines for stored grain, lists of who borrowed tools, notations about upcoming obligations, a cousin's visit, the next ritual, a neighbour's feast. If Excel sheets existed in 700 BCE, this is what they'd look like. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Roman women kept their own private tallies, tiny notched sticks hidden in cupboards or woven into baskets. Backup accounting. Just in case a husband forgot to count something, or a neighbour conveniently misremembered a loan. Ancient receipts, quiet, clever, and extremely effective in disputes. You step into another home, where the smell of drying fish hits you like a wall. A woman and her daughter stand beside a row of racks, brushing salt over the fish with brisk, methodical strokes. Preserving food this way ensures they'll have protein through winter. The daughter wrinkles her nose at the smell but keeps working. Her mother smirks, the universal "you'll get used to it" expression shared by parents everywhere. From outside you hear the rhythmic pounding of grain. You follow the sound to find an older woman grinding barley with a long wooden pestle. She's strong, steady, humming a tune older than Rome itself. Her granddaughter scoops the milled grain into a basket. This grain will be boiled into porridge, baked into bread, transformed into the meals that keep everyone alive. Historians still argue whether women managed domestic economy because men were constantly absent, or because early societies recognized women's organizational strengths. Some claim it was cultural tradition, others say it was pure necessity. But as you watch women turn raw goods into order, food, cloth, tools, rituals, the academic debate fades. What you see is competence made visible. You pass by a shady alcove where 2 women sit weaving on upright looms. The rhythmic beat of the loom weight sounds like a calming drum. Their fingers move with a speed you can't even follow, pulling thread through thread, creating patterns so fine you wonder how anyone invented this without accidentally tying themselves to the loom. One woman looks up, smiles faintly, and gestures to a finished bolt of cloth hanging beside her. It's thick, warm, durable, not fancy, just reliable. The kind of cloth that will last through winter storms, muddy work days, and daily wear. The fabric of Roman life. Nearby, another group of women sorts dried fruits, figs, grapes, plums, placing the best pieces in jars for winter and the less perfect pieces in a bowl destined for immediate snacking. A toddler waddles by and steals a fig. No one stops him. He'll burn the energy off within minutes. You step toward a shed where a young wife is tallying small debts owed to her household. A neighbour borrowed a jar of honey. Another owes 3 hours of weaving help. Another promised a handful of olives. If Rome had credit scores, she'd run the system. Her husband approaches, looking sheepish. He mutters something about misplacing a tool. She smiles politely. Too politely. Then she hands him a list of everything missing this week. He nods solemnly, like a man who just remembered he forgot to remember something important. Women manage domestic economics with precision sharpened by necessity. Not because they're praised for it, not because anyone calls them geniuses, but because survival depends on their accuracy. You reach a communal storage house, where several families keep shared goods. Women move in and out, exchanging salt, grain, tools, cloth. They track who owes what without ever writing it down. An entire economic system resting on memory, trust, and a few stern reminders. This is Rome's quiet backbone, an economy held together by women who know every family's needs, anticipate shortages, prevent waste, smooth conflicts, allocate resources with surgical precision. Not through grand speeches, not through political office, but through relentless invisible competence. You step back into the main lane, feeling the hum of daily labour settle into your bones. Rome may grow into a mighty empire, but its foundations are woven here, in kitchens, courtyards, workshops, and storerooms where women turn chaos into continuity. And as you walk on, you carry the soft percussion of looms, mortars, and steady hands with you, guiding you toward the next quiet realm where women shape Rome with skills the world rarely sees. You drift away from the storerooms and weaving sheds, leaving behind the rhythmic beat of looms and the earthy scent of grain, and follow a narrow walkway lined with low stone walls. The late afternoon sun slants warm across the ground. Children chase each other past you, their voices high and wild, while women call after them with the universal tone that means, "I swear, if you break one more basket." You're heading toward a quieter edge of the settlement, a place where girls gather in small clusters, hovering between childhood curiosity and adult expectation. This is where the education of girls happens in early Rome, not in marble academies, not in structured classrooms, but in 1,000 small lessons woven into daily life. Lessons given by mothers, aunts, neighbours, midwives, craftswomen, even the older girls themselves. And each lesson carries double meaning, learning the role society expects, and learning how to bend, stretch, or subtly subvert it. You stop near a sunlit courtyard where a group of girls sits cross-legged on woven mats. An older woman stands before them, holding a wax tablet and stylus. She draws a simple symbol, then gestures for them to copy it. The girls lean forward, tongues peeking out in concentration as they scratch careful marks into their tablets. One of them presses too hard and snaps her stylus. She gasps. The woman sighs, not annoyed, just resigned, like someone who's seen 12,000 styluses break under 12,000 tiny hands. One mainstream historical fact: while boys might receive more formal instruction, especially in elite families, girls' education in early Rome was overwhelmingly practical. They learned reading, simple math, and religious duties, but they also learned weaving, singing, household management, healing, midwifery basics, bargaining skills, and the intricate unspoken language of social expectation. The older woman now shifts to arithmetic, drawing neat rows of dots. The girls count aloud. Their voices rise in a soft melodic rhythm. Even the one who snapped her stylus manages to keep up, erasing mistakes with the flat end before sneaking glances to copy her neighbour's work. Resourcefulness. Lesson number 1 in all centuries. As you observe, you catch a whisper behind you. Two teenage girls sit beneath a fig tree stitching cloth. Their conversation flutters between gossip, dreams and worries. Who might get married soon? Who hopes not to? Who wishes to travel? Who secretly wants to learn healing instead of weaving? These private talks are their true education, learning to interpret signals, navigate relationships, study the shifting map of social life. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some early Roman girls practiced reciting legal phrases, not to use them outright, that would raise eyebrows, but to understand contracts, property rules and oaths. Knowledge they weren't supposed to engage with directly, but might need in emergencies. You continue down a narrow alley where a mother teaches her daughter how to manage household accounts. They kneel beside a low bench covered with tokens, small clay discs, carved sticks, bits of bone. Each token stands for a unit of grain, an hour of labour, a cloth-length ode, a jar of oil promised. The mother shifts them patiently, explaining debts, agreements, and exchanges. The girl watches intently, repeating the numbers under her breath. Her face is serious, too serious for her age, but early Rome doesn't offer childhood as a long vacation. Here, competence is a necessity, and girls learn early. Historians still argue whether girls' education empowered them or simply trained them into domestic submission. The evidence is murky. Some inscriptions praise educated women, others imply that too much learning made women unruly. But watching these girls, you see a more complicated truth. Education gives them tools they will wield in ways subtle, strategic, and sometimes quietly rebellious. You wander toward a shaded portico where a grandmother sits telling stories to three young girls. Not myths this time, practical stories. How she managed the household during a famine, how she negotiated with a stubborn neighbour, how she once prevented a feud by offering bread to the right person at the right moment. These aren't bedtime tales. They're manuals for survival disguised as memories. The girls listen in reverent silence, absorbing strategies they might use decades later. Diplomacy through kindness, strength through composure, influence without confrontation. The grandmother's voice softens as she speaks, but her eyes burn with a spark that says, yes, we had rules. Yes, we followed them, but we also bent them when necessary. Nearby, a midwife teaches two older girls how to feel a pulse, how to check a fever, how to brew an infusion for stomach aches. They lean over her hands, watching every movement. The midwife speaks firmly, her voice low. These lessons could mean life or death later on. She teaches them not because society demands it, but because women look out for one another. Quiet mentorship passing through each generation like an underground river. You turn toward the edge of the settlement where a girl practices walking with a water jar balanced on her shoulder. Her mother corrects her posture again and again until her steps glide without spilling a drop. It seems simple, but this is more than physical training. It teaches grace, balance, confidence, qualities people will note when they read her tomorrow, next week, or at her wedding. In another courtyard, a pair of sisters practice weaving. One sings softly to keep rhythm, the other mimics her movements. Their cloth grows slowly, line by line. Weaving teaches patience, precision, and endurance, and every girl in Rome learns it whether she likes it or not. But it also teaches creativity. A small variation in colour here, a new pattern there, tiny acts of self-expression hidden in plain sight. As the sun sinks lower, girls gather to help prepare the evening meal. They chop vegetables, crush herbs, stir broths, and laugh as they work. The tasks are routine, but the learning is constant. How to coordinate, how to multitask, how to read moods, how to solve problems before they become crises. All these skills, practical, emotional, spiritual, form the invisible architecture of their future lives. As you watch them disperse into the dusk, you realize something. Early Rome didn't give girls power through laws or titles. It gave them power through responsibility, skill, and the quiet intelligence forged in daily labor. And those skills, they shape Rome just as surely as any sword or senate decree. You walk on, guided by the soft sounds of evening lessons, the laughter, the chanting, the scratch of styluses on wax, toward the next hidden realm where women pull threads of connection beneath Rome's growing surface. You walk away from the courtyards where girls practiced writing and weaving, moving deeper into the settlement as twilight settles over early Rome. The sky softens into a muted purple, the kind of dimming light that invites secrets to stir. Evening is when the public noise dies down enough for the private world to emerge, a world made not of rituals or chores, but of whispered conversations, shared glances, quiet alliances. This is where female networks and secrets reveal their quiet power. You notice it almost immediately, the shift in atmosphere. Women who spent the day bent over grain, weaving, cleaning, or negotiating now gather in small clusters. Some sit on low stools outside their homes, others lean against door frames. A few form tight circles around shared lamps. But the energy is unmistakable, lighter, freer, strangely electric. This is when information travels, when emotional bonds strengthen, when women exchange the kinds of truths nobody dares say when the sun is too bright. A group sits beneath an olive tree, passing a bowl of figs between them. Their voices rise and fall in soft waves. You drift closer, not to intrude, but to listen from the edges. They speak about everything. Whose child nearly ran headfirst into a fence post, which husband forgot the olive jar again, how someone's goat has developed a talent for escaping and eating laundry. Jokes mix with sighs, frustrations with reassurances. This is social maintenance, the emotional weaving that keeps entire communities functioning. One mainstream historical fact: Roman women created strong neighborhood networks, vicinicium, informal webs of support built around proximity and shared labor. They swapped goods, shared tools, coordinated childcare, cared for the sick, and transmitted information that rarely made it into official male conversation. These networks were the backbone of early urban life, but what historians rarely capture is the texture of these connections, the coded language, the laughter that masks sharp insight, the side glances that reveal everything. A woman leans in, lowering her voice. She shares news, half gossip, half caution, about a neighbouring family's dispute. The others listen, heads tipping. Each is already calculating what this means. Who needs help? Who needs distance? Who might become unpredictable? In a world without letters, messengers, or reliable communication, women serve as the settlement's living information system. A quirky tidbit swirls through your mind. Archaeologists have found graffiti and small notes suggesting that women sometimes traded encoded messages, symbols on pottery, knots in thread, or even subtle shifts in where household items were placed. Tiny signals, but meaningful to those who knew how to read them. You continue down the lane and see two elder women sitting at a doorstep, faces half lit by a clay lamp. One is telling a story, an old one, softened by time and retelling. The younger women around her nod, their expressions rapt. This isn't just entertainment. This is generational knowledge disguised as conversation. And then, the elder says, tapping her cane for emphasis, you never trust a man who insists he never forgets anything. That's how you know he forgets everything. The group bursts into laughter. It's warm, genuine, and threaded with recognition. You pass an open doorway where a few women gather around a newborn. They're whispering blessings, sharing advice, soothing the exhausted mother, swapping remedies. One brings a charm to hang above the baby's crib, protection from wandering spirits. Another brings bread. Another brings news of a neighbour who can help with chores. This isn't just support, it's strategic resource pooling, and it's almost entirely invisible to the male-centred historical record. Further down the lane, you find a trio of teenage girls sitting on a flat stone, heads together, whispering fiercely. Their conversations flow from crushes to fears to dreams to complaints about chores. You catch fragments. If he thinks I'm weaving all the winter cloaks alone. And then she said the goddess would give me a sign. I swear, my father pretends not to hear anything unless it benefits him. Teenage girls in 700 BCE are no less dramatic than those today. Their expressions shift wildly, giddy, exasperated, secretive, triumphant. But beneath the giggles and theatrics lies something deeper: emotional intelligence, bonding, mutual trust, early rehearsals for the negotiations of adult life. You slip past them and approach a dim courtyard where several women sit close, whispering in tones that carry a different weight. These are the painful topics: a sick child, a rumour of brewing conflict between families, a neighbour's husband who came home drunk and angry. The women listen without judgment, offering advice, strategies and quiet promises. Someone places a hand on another's knee. Another offers a comfort charm, pressing it into her, palm with a nod. Historians still argue whether women used these nighttime networks to influence local politics. Some claim the impact was negligible. Others say it shaped marriage alliances, prevented feuds, and even influenced decisions about when men marched to war. Watching them now, how they coordinate, soothe, analyze, and prepare, you feel that influence humming beneath every word. This is leadership woven into conversation. As evening deepens into true night, the conversations become even softer, almost lullaby-like. Lamps flicker. A few women extinguish theirs early to save oil. Others keep them burning as they finish textile work, whispering to one another between passes of the spindle. You see one woman slip away quietly, darting toward a neighbour's home with a bundle under her cloak. She leaves it on the doorstep, a loaf of bread perhaps, or a small pot of herbs, before disappearing back into the shadows. No credit, no acknowledgement, just help where help is needed. You step down toward the river, where a group of women stand barefoot in the cool mud, washing the final vessels of the day. Their chatter is low and private, carried away by the water. You catch only fragments about husbands, rituals, birth omens, and the unpredictable nature of goats. And then, your final glimpse, a woman pauses, looks around cautiously, and reveals a small carved pendant to her friend. Its markings are unusual, older than Rome itself. The friend's eyes widen. Secrets, you realize, aren't only about people. They're about the past, the gods, the world's hidden corners. The pendant disappears back into her tunic before you get a better look. Even here, especially here, women share knowledge that travels nowhere else. As you walk away, you feel the pulse of these networks settling under the night like roots, spreading beneath the soil. Invisible, yes. Unrecorded, definitely. But essential. Rome survives because women talk to one another. Because they share fears. Because they share bread. Because they share secrets. You follow the darkening lane forward, guided by the soft glow of oil lamps and the quiet certainty that the strongest structures in Rome aren't built from stone. They're built from conversations. You move away from the whisper-lit lanes, following the curve of a narrow street as the night deepens and the settlement sinks into a soft hush. The cicadas buzz lazily. A lone dog barks in the distance. The moon climbs higher, spilling silver light over rooftops that look half asleep. You feel it immediately, a stillness that isn't quite peace, more like anticipation. Early Rome, for all its daily rhythms, is never completely safe. Crises lurk everywhere. Fires, storms, raids, disease, family feuds, droughts, wild animals, political uncertainty. And when those crises hit, the people who step forward aren't always the loudest voices. More often, it's the women, the ones who plan quietly, observe carefully and act decisively when chaos arrives. Tonight you're walking into that part of Rome's story, the moments when women lead not through titles but through necessity. You don't have to wait long. A sudden shout splits the night, then another. The sound rattles through the settlement like a jolt of electricity. People scramble from their homes, pulling cloaks around their shoulders. A fire. You smell it before you see it. The sharp, acrid bite of something burning too fast, too hot. You sprint toward the commotion. Flames lick the side of a small storage hut, illuminating the silhouettes of frantic figures. But it's not the men who take charge. They're stumbling half awake, shouting contradictory instructions. No, it's the women who snap into action. A matron grabs a clay bucket and shouts, "Form a line! Move!" Another woman drags two teenagers to the well, barking orders like she's led 10 battles already. A grandmother wedges herself between children and the flames, her posture daring the fire to even try her. One mainstream historical fact. Early Rome was built out of wood, straw, and clay, highly flammable materials. Fires swept settlements with terrifying speed, and women who spent more time tending hearths knew exactly how to manage flame. They understood what to smother, what to soak, and how to choke a fire of its air. Buckets of water fly from hand to hand. Women throw wet blankets on the flames. One drops to her knees and pushes sand into a gap beneath the burning roof. Another yells at a man trying to beat the fire with a broom. "You're feeding it, you idiot!" He blinks, ashamed, and switches to hauling water. The coordinated rhythm is astonishing. Efficient, fast, competent. No panic, just ferocious focus. Within minutes, the flames shrink. Smoke thickens. A few final splashes of water send up hissing steam. The crisis ebbs as quickly as it rose. Women cough, wipe soot from their faces, and immediately turn their attention to the family whose storage hut was damaged. They gather supplies, grain, blankets, tools, from neighbours who offer them without hesitation. No politics, no ceremony, just immediate solution-making. As people disperse, the settlement exhales, but the night is far from over. You hear a low rumble of voices approaching. 2 men are arguing loudly, furious, wild-eyed, carrying the unmistakable energy of a feud dangerously close to violence. You smell wine on their breath from 8 paces away. Before you can react, a middle-aged woman stands between them, small, unarmed, but radiating the authority of someone who's diffused this nonsense 100 times. "Enough," she says, voice calm but cutting. "Not tonight." One man protests, the other snaps back. She stares at them both with the quiet, unblinking gaze of a woman who raised 4 children and has no time for grown men behaving like toddlers. They pause. She steps closer. The argument dissolves faster than you'd think possible. Historians still argue whether early Roman women truly held power during crises or merely stepped in when men were absent. But the truth unfolding before you is clear. Chaos bows to whoever can calm it. And tonight, that isn't the men yelling threats, it's the women using practicality like a shield. You continue down the lane, and the air shifts again, heavier now, thick with dread. You hear sobbing from a small hut. A child lies on a woven mat, fever burning through his tiny body. His mother sits beside him, eyes hollow with worry. A group of women, healers, neighbours, friends, gather immediately. They bring cool cloths, herbs, water, a charm carved from olive wood. They take turns tending the child, teaching the mother how to rotate cloth and whispering encouragement with every small improvement. One woman checks the child's breathing, another hums softly, a low thread of music meant to steady everyone in the room. A third mixes an infusion, carefully measured, carefully stirred. These women don't have formal authority, no titles, no institutional power, but right now they are leaders, holding fear at bay through knowledge, comfort, and presence. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some Roman households kept a secret stash of herbs meant only for emergencies, guarded and administered exclusively by women. Not out of selfishness, but because they understood the stakes better than anyone. Hours pass. The fever breaks. Exhausted relief ripples across the room. The child sleeps. The crisis dissipates. You step outside, inhaling the cool night air, letting the quiet wash over you. But early Rome has one more surprise waiting. A messenger stumbles into the settlement with news. A nearby tribe was sighted moving toward Roman territory. Not an attack yet, but close enough to rile up the men into panicked speculation. Fear spreads faster than logic. Men cluster in groups, debating strategies, pacing, arguing about which omen means what. And the women? They do the opposite. They gather children inside. They secure livestock. They reinforce doors. They tie back hair, tighten cloaks, organize supplies. Calm, methodical, efficient. You watch a matron walk past the frantic men with a basket of tools and a face that says, "I'm not waiting for you to make up your minds." She isn't wrong. Historians still argue whether women influence decisions about war or defense. But it's obvious here. Their practical choices shape survival long before any shield is raised. By the time dawn threatens the horizon, the settlement has endured fire, feud, illness, and fear, and in every moment of crisis, women were the ones who steadied the ground beneath everyone's feet. Not through shouting, not through formal power, but through instinct, experience, and unshakable resilience. You take a long breath and continue onward, feeling the strength of early Rome's women echoing behind you like a heartbeat. Quiet, constant, and utterly essential. You walk slowly through the pale wash of early dawn, the sky just beginning to soften from ink black to a muted grey blue. The settlement feels strangely calm after the long night of fire, fever, and frayed tempers. Smoke still hangs in thin ribbons over rooftops, and the first stirring of morning chores begins. A broom brushing softly, a pot being set over a rekindled hearth, the low murmur of 2 women discussing what needs doing now that the crisis has passed. But beneath this gentle morning rhythm lies something deeper. the shifting laws and shifting leverage that shape women's lives in early Rome. Laws that sometimes restrain, laws that sometimes quietly expand, laws that sometimes pretend women have no influence, while simultaneously relying on that influence to hold the entire system together. You follow a narrow street that opens into a communal area where several matrons gather around a wooden bench. A scribe, one of the few literate men in this part of the settlement, reads aloud a new ruling delivered from a nearby community. Changes to inheritance rules, adjustments to marriage contracts, clarifications of who technically controls property within a household. He reads slowly with the pompous flair of someone who likes the sound of his own voice. But the women, they're listening with the sharp focus of people calculating exactly how these words will affect their lives. One mainstream historical fact: early Roman law positioned women under the authority of male guardians, fathers, husbands, or male relatives. They couldn't independently represent themselves in many legal matters, and yet in practice, women found ways to negotiate, influence, reinterpret, and work around those very same laws, a contradiction built into the DNA of Roman society. As the scribe drones on, a middle-aged Matrona quietly nudges her neighbour and whispers, "He skipped a line again." The neighbour snorts softly. They've all learned to double-check men's readings, not because the men are malicious, just because they don't always notice details the way these women do. You sit near them pretending to study a cluster of wildflowers while listening in. The topic shifts to dowries, who controls them, how they can be protected, and what happens if a husband mismanages the funds. One woman leans forward, tapping her finger against her knee. "My dowry is for my children," she says firmly, "not for my husband to buy another goat with questionable intelligence." The others laugh, but they nod. They know the truth. Dowries, though technically controlled by husbands, are often managed emotionally and socially by wives. A woman's leverage increases when she controls valuable goods: cloth, jewellery, oil stores, livestock. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. Some early Roman families created informal shadow contracts, unwritten but widely understood. A father would make it clear that if a son-in-law squandered his daughter's dowry, he could expect no further support, no seasonal gifts, and no help during shortages. Social enforcement disguised as family culture. You follow the women as they move toward a shaded courtyard, continuing their discussion without missing a beat. A younger woman joins them, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She explains that her husband wants to move her dowry items from her chest to his storeroom for safekeeping. Collective silence. Then a chorus of deliberate pointed advice. "Keep your mother's jewellery with you. Let him move the tools, but not the cloth. Safekeeping often means I forgot where I put it. Tell him you need quick access for future rituals." You note how seamlessly these women transform law into negotiation. They know when to follow it. They know when to sidestep it. They know when to reinterpret it with charm, suggestion, or stubborn politeness. Historians still argue whether early Roman women had any real say in legal matters, or if their influence was purely informal. But standing here, watching a group of women coordinate their strategies like a chess team planning 10 moves ahead, you feel confident about the answer. Formal power? No. Practical leverage? Absolutely. You wander deeper into the settlement and find two women discussing guardianship rules. A widow is trying to secure her late husband's land for her sons, but a distant male relative is technically her son's legal guardian. The widow looks exhausted but determined. The other woman, older, wise-toned, gives her advice about approaching the guardian with gifts, flattering his ego subtly, and securing witnesses to their agreements so he can't deny them later. This, you realise, is the unseen legal system. Women teaching women how to navigate structures not built for them, using intelligence sharpened by necessity. Nearby, a young bride carries a clay jar filled with oil. She pauses when she overhears the conversation, listening intently. She's learning too, absorbing tactics she'll need later, long before she knows she needs them. You step into a shaded vestibule where two girls practice reading inscriptions from broken pottery shards. One girl traces a line with her finger. "Property of..." She squints. "Property of who?" Her sister shrugs. "Probably someone bossy," they giggle. But then their mother glances over and says, "Learn the marks. Even if you never write them, know what they mean." Knowledge is leverage. You wander toward a cluster of homes near the settlement's edge. A family stands outside disputing a boundary stone. Two men argue loudly. A teenage girl stands just behind them, arms crossed, eyes sharp. After a few minutes, she steps forward, picks up a stick and draws the old boundary lines in the dirt. Lines she remembers from a childhood game she played years ago. Both men go silent. Her memory settles the argument faster than any written tablet. A woman beside you whispers, "Children see everything. We should listen to them more." As midday warms the ground, you pass one last scene. A Matrona speaking privately with a young man. Her husband, son, nephew, doesn't matter. She's advising him on how to present himself at a meeting with other men from the settlement, reminding him what to emphasize, what to downplay, what agreements to seek. He listens with deep respect. You realize something profound. Though laws shift slowly and often limit women on the surface, women constantly reshape the practical meaning of those laws through interpretation, strategy, social pressure, memory, and sheer competence. The legal world may claim their voices don't matter, but the lived world depends on them. As you step away from the courtyard, you can almost feel the quiet machinery of early Rome turning, powered not just by votes, decrees, or elite decisions, but by countless small acts of negotiation and wisdom woven into daily life by women who understand the system better than those who built it. And you walk on, guided by this unspoken truth toward the final legacy waiting in the shadows of early Rome's story. You walk slowly through the awakening settlement, feeling the final strands of early Roman dawn unfurl across the ground like pale ribbons of light. The sky blushes at the edges, soft rose, then gold, and the shadows of homes, baskets, tools, and sleeping animals stretch long and thin, as if early Rome itself is yawning awake after a night full of worry, work, and whispered negotiations. You've wandered through this world long enough now to sense something deeper than the stories themselves. An entire civilization built on quiet labor, quiet influence, quiet power. The kind that moves beneath the surface, never clamoring for attention, but shaping everything from the hearth to the city walls. And here, in this final stretch of your journey, you drift into the lingering legacies in the shadows, the parts of early Rome that women carved, held, defended, whispered into place, and quietly passed down long before marble forums or bronze statues ever existed. You step into a clearing at the edge of the settlement. It's nothing dramatic, just a patch of earth half circled by stones where a few women sit tending morning fires. But as you approach, one of them looks up with a soft smile as if she's been expecting you. Her hair is streaked with grey. Her posture is strong despite decades of labour, and her presence carries the weight of countless untold stories. She pats the ground beside her. You sit. She doesn't speak at first, not with words. She gestures toward the settlement, letting you watch the dawn-light movements of Rome's women. One carries water from the river, her jar balanced perfectly. One kneels to coax embers into flame, blowing softly. One hums to a toddler strapped to her hip. One lifts a woven basket of figs onto a neighbour's doorstep. One examines a clay tablet of tallied debts. One weaves, one prays, one negotiates with a stubborn goat, and another, already, begins grinding grain for the day. All of them moving in rhythm, the way instruments in an orchestra fall into harmony without ever being taught to play together formally. One mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Early Rome's social, political, and economic stability depended heavily on women's labour and emotional labour, from domestic rituals to resource management, from childcare to conflict mediation. Without these daily actions, Rome's foundations would crumble long before its legends ever formed. The older woman beside you finally speaks. "Most of our stories won't be told," she says simply. Her voice is gentle, but it lands like a stone dropped into water, rippling through time, through everything you've witnessed. She points toward a group of girls practicing their letters. "They'll know some things," she murmurs. "Not all." Then her gaze follows a group of men marching out of the settlement, shields slung across their backs, weapons clinking softly. "They'll tell those stories," she adds, "and they'll forget ours." You feel that truth settle in your chest like a weight. She's right, not in bitterness, not in resignation, but in clarity. Early Rome will someday write epics, histories, legal codes, Men's names will dominate them. Men's deeds will be carved in stone. And yet. A quirky tidbit drifts across your thoughts. How archaeologists sometimes find traces of women's lives woven invisibly into the fragments of ancient Rome. Fingerprints on pottery, dropped beads, spindle whorls buried in ashes, scraps of children's clothes mended by careful hands. Evidence that the real work of living, surviving and building happened in places rarely recorded. The older woman leans back, stretching her hands near the fire. "But Rome remembers us," she says softly. You raise an eyebrow, curious. She taps her chest. "In here." Then she taps yours, right above your heart. "And in you. Anyone who listens, not just to the loud stories but the quiet ones, carries us forward." Historians still argue whether women's contributions shaped Rome as much as men's. Some say yes, some say no, some say we simply lack enough evidence. But sitting here, watching the sun catch the edges of women's faces as they begin another long day of invisible labour, you feel the certainty of it. Civilizations aren't built by heroes, they're built by hands, mostly women's hands. A young mother passes by, her newborn wrapped snugly. She adjusts the cloth, smiling down with sleepy tenderness. Behind her, a group of teenage girls compare weaving patterns they invented, snickering as they show off hidden, stitched symbols known only to each other. Across the way, a grandmother teaches a child how to sweep the threshold properly to keep out misfortune. These aren't grand deeds, they won't appear in scrolls, but they're what make everything else possible. The wise woman beside you speaks again. "Men build from the outside," she muses, "but women build from the inside. Roots must come before trees." You watch as a woman pours a libation at a tiny household shrine, whispering a morning prayer. Another returns from the fields carrying the first handful of herbs for the day. Another ties her daughter's belt, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. Quiet power. Everyday power. Legacy. You ask the older woman what she believes her legacy will be. She laughs softly, a warm knowing sound. "Continuity," she says simply. "That is all we ever protect." And then you realize, nothing in early Rome endures, laws, kings, territory, unless women sustain the daily fabric underneath. Their influence is not recorded in victories but in survival. You rise slowly, feeling the end of your journey approaching like the final exhale of night before morning settles fully across the land. The settlement stirs, fires bloom, pots clang, voices rise in greeting. A woman calls to her daughters, another gathers herbs, another lifts a bucket, another starts kneading bread whose warmth you can already imagine. Rome, its earliest, gentlest pulse, beats through these gestures. You turn for one last look. No trumpets, no monuments, just quiet power. The kind that lives in the shadows, shaping everything without ever needing the light. And you walk on, letting the soft morning glow guide you away from early Rome's hidden world of women, carrying their stories, their strength, and their quiet triumphs with you like a whisper the world almost forgot to hear. And now, let everything soften. Let the noise of early Rome fade out behind you, dissolving into a gentle hum, the kind you barely notice until it's gone. Feel the cool, steady air of dawn wrap itself around your shoulders like a warm shawl, and let your breath fall into an easy, unhurried rhythm. You've walked through hearth-lit homes and dusty lanes. You've watched fires rise and fall. You've seen women guide chaos with nothing more than calm hands, steady eyes, and a quiet certainty that things can be held together, even when the world tilts. Let those images drift like dust motes in a slow beam of light. Picture the soft glow of a clay lamp in a dark room. Picture a child sleeping safe after long hours of fear. Picture a woman stirring a pot, humming a tune her grandmother taught her, a tune that has crossed generations without ever being written down. Feel the warmth of that hearth. Feel the peace of those murmured conversations. Feel the way strength doesn't have to shout to be real. Let your thoughts wander lazily, like a river slipping past reeds. There is nothing left to do now. Nothing to solve, nothing to remember. Just rest. If your eyes feel heavy, let them close. If your breath feels slow, let it stay slow. And if your mind wants to drift, let it drift wherever it wishes. You're safe here. carried by stories older than stone, held by voices that kept whole worlds together, and as the last traces of early Rome fade into a soft blur, let yourself sink gently into comfort, into stillness, into sleep.